Check, check. Check 1, 2. Hey, hey. Check, check, check 1, 2. Hey, hey.
Yeah, the only time I'm getting a roll is whenever you're coming from the because I've got this going straight in. I'm fine.
I get along with everything that's not
Maybe.
but when it comes to things like
Well, the thing too though is, going straight in here.
yes.
The moment I take this and go into my decimeter pulse and back out, for whatever reason, this nothing's causing a break on my end. But I don't need to worry because it shouldn't be projected in that morning session.
Yeah.
We made it work yesterday by timing out.
And it's
You're either trying to do no exposure for this region or for in person. So somewhere in the middle is great.
yeah. Yeah.
And we
Well,
switched it out. I don't
yeah, it
know.
depends on the position. Any said yes. Work better with them. I think
Yeah.
because I have no desire to do it. I don't know if I do. At the same time, it's like it comes to a point where it's like if you've got capacity and you want to do it, it needs to get done.
Ryan, nice to meet you.
Or do I really want
Well, I think that one we should over.
Right,
I,
have to be here.
right. Unless Stan wants to
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. The coffee's kicked in. Those of us on Central Time or even further west are struggling more than others, so please be patient. I'm Stan Kleppinger. I teach at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I am the chair of SMT's Professional Development Committee, which has put together this session on, and I'll get the title exactly right here, Contemplating and Making the Transition to Academic Administration. So this session, I'll start by saying right now, it probably won't run the full 3 hours that are allotted to it in the program. Not least of which, but not only because one of our speakers wasn't able to be here today. You'll notice in the program, Kathryn Nolan was to join us as well. She took ill. She's doing fine, but her doctors insisted she not travel outside the country for the time being. So she won't be able to be with us today, and that's regrettable. So what I'd like to do, though, is introduce our panelists one at a time. Each of them is going to have a short statement, and I understand that they're mostly pretty extemporaneous statements about their roles and their academic roles, and their journey into administration from the music theory world. And after each of them has had a chance to talk about what they do and how they got there, I'm going to start the conversation and just moderate a discussion of a few questions that we've prepared that we think might be helpful to everybody. But I'd like to allow also plenty of time after that for all of you to ask specific questions of one of them or all of them about their careers, how they got there, and frankly, how each of us knows if we should go there. So let me begin straight away. I'll introduce Sarah here. Sarah Ellis is Associate Director and Kenneth and Bernadine Russell Professor in the School of Music at the University of Oklahoma. She teaches graduate and undergraduate music theory. Her research focuses on the creation of meaning within musical works and draws on a variety of critical approaches to meaning, including semiotics, deconstruction, and Lacanian psychoanalysis. She's given presentations on her research throughout the United States and Europe, as many of us know. Her book, Composing the Modern Subject, 4 String Quartets by Shostakovich, was published by Ashgate in 2008. Would you please help me to welcome Sarah?
I think I sound so much better when Stan announces what I do. I think I'm going to bring him around and just have him introduce me. So I'm going to talk about, we're supposed to talk about sort of our trajectories. I have probably the shortest trajectory of anyone because I'm the lowest level administrator. But I want to talk about, there's actually different pathways to administration. There's sort of administration that is, I think the more traditional one that's through your school, your college. And then there's some administrative roles that you can fill outside of those pathways, and I've done both of them. So first of all, within the School of Music, my first administrative position was an assistant director for undergraduate advising and curriculum. And it's pretty self-explanatory what I did there. I was in charge of advising. At that time, we had all faculty advisors, and so I had to herd those cats. And I had to deal with, some were great and some were just horrible. That's all there was to it. And so I did a lot of picking up the slack for them. I was already an advisor, so I continued advising. I will say advising students is one of my most pleasurable jobs I've ever done. You get to interact with them in a way that doesn't involve grading them. You get to help them pursue their passions, and I know the system better than them, so I could figure out how they could. And you get to keep them from falling through the cracks. So that was really a positive experience. I was also in charge of running our undergraduate studies committee, which is our curriculum committee for undergraduate studies. And I was in charge of the most dreaded thing ever, the assessment reports. So I did this. I will tell you how I got the position, which is sort of interesting. We had a director who had a horrible record of only promoting men. And there was basically a female faculty revolt about this. And they decided not only were they going to go complain to him about him, they were going to tell him who he was going to promote and where he was going to promote that person. that was me. And it was a bunch of more senior female faculty, and they decided it, and they came and told me this. And these women have been great colleagues to me, and I wasn't going to tell them no. So that's how I got into that position. 3 years later, I had to file a complaint because he didn't pay me equal on the other assistant directors. And we had a new director at that time, and he cut me a check by the end of the week. So that's how fast that happened. So I am now associate director, and this was done, we had a new director, 2 new ones now since then, and it was done in a much more transparent manner. They did an open search, and multiple people applied, and we interviewed for it, and I got that. When I applied for the associate director position, I was told that if I got it, they would fill the assistant director position with someone else. They didn't. Now I do both jobs. And for a year, they actually listed me twice. Like, I was listed as associate director, and then right under that as assistant director. And I finally was like, this is ridiculous, people. Our associate director, I half-jokingly call myself the CBO for the School of Music, Chief Bureaucratic Officer. I push the papers, and I'm basically in charge of all the paperwork. That's what I feel like, which I know isn't true. But as our director has had to take on more and more of a developmental role, somebody's got to push the papers. I do all the scheduling of our classes with respect to the course schedule, but also with respect to the building. I work very closely with our facilities manager, who's a great person. I'm often the first stop when people have questions that, issues they need to be solved, and I either figure out how to solve them or I go, that's a director's problem. In general, all budget items go to the director, and all personnel items go to the director unless he doesn't want to deal with it, and then it's my problem. But in general, those are you always have these standard personnel issues that are not too difficult, and so I deal with them. Let's see, I sign off on all payroll and purchases. I end up, when I say Chief Bureaucratic Officer, it's true. We got a new degree. I did all the NASM paperwork to get us that degree approved. I did all the Board of Regents paperwork for that degree to get approved. I do all curriculum change paperwork. And then I just, I fill in for the director when he needs to. And we work really well together. I have a great director. I'm very happy with that working relationship. So that's what I do within the School of Music. I've done a couple of things outside the School of Music. One that some people would call administrative, one that some people would call service, but I have probably learned more in those positions than I ever have in my School of Music positions. One was 3 years ago, I served as our chair of our faculty senate. And historically, our faculty senate was mostly a reporting body. People came and reported to us. Excuse me. As I was moving up the ranks to be chair, there was a group of us that wanted it to become a more legislative body and a more representative body of the faculty to the administration and to the Board of Regents. The year that I became faculty senate chair, the university sort of imploded. For the first time in 24 years, we had a presidential transition. The former president, who is a former senator, a state senator, there was a total cult of personality with respect to him, was pushed out by the Board of Regents. We did a search for a new president. The Board of Regents really did not handle that well. It was not transparent at all. And the person they hired was a oil company CEO who had no clue what he was getting himself into. And I think there's nobody out there that wouldn't say that the whole thing was a failure. He lasted 10 months. At the same time, we had a Board of Regents that got, one of the members of the Board of Regents got on national TV and made homophobic slurs. And our teachers went on walkout because we're not allowed to strike in the state of Oklahoma. And it was trial by fire. I had press releases, I had interviews, I was having meetings I had the chairman of the Board of Regents' phone number programmed into my phone. he and I always had very pleasant conversations where I got nowhere. It was trial by fire, and it really forced me to walk my talk. And when we had a regent come out and say a homophobic slur, I decided that there was no way I was going back to my students and not say I didn't stand up for them. And I ended up making a announcement on the state news about this. So that was a real experience. One of the things and I'm going to say we, because I had an amazing executive committee that year, is we transformed the faculty senate at the university, and now it is a functional legislative body that lobbies strongly for the faculty, and we try to lobby for the staff also, since we have tenure and they don't. And the 10-month president laid off close to 500 staff. And so during that period, they didn't want to talk at all. And so we are now a real functional legislative body, and because of that, we have managed to force committees that force the budget decisions to be transparent. And so I ended up co-chairing with the provost, who is the epitome of white male privilege, the president Academic Program Budget Advisory Committee. And so all academic program budget cuts, and there were budget cuts in every academic program, went through this committee. And we did not stop the steamroller, but we slowed it down. We limited the collateral damage, and we made sure that it was not really cutting to the core of our research or teaching mission. That committee, with our third president, that president now has decided that same committee is writing the strategic plan for the university. So I'm doing that now. So because of my forcing them to take the faculty into consideration for decisions, I am now co-chairing these two committees. I have learned a great deal about the overall budget process for the university and what our budget situation is. And now, as reading a strategic framework, I am really getting to understand the basics of what every aspect of our institution does and how it affects students' education, research, and service to the university. So while that wouldn't necessarily be considered administration, it has strongly influenced me as an administrator, and basically made me the administrator I am. So I think I'll leave it at that.
And again, we'll have a chance to ask Sarah and all our panelists some questions later after we hear from everybody. So let me go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Ryan McClelland. Ryan is professor of music theory at the University of Toronto and also serves as Associate Dean for Academic and Student Affairs in the Faculty of Music. His research interests include, as many of us know, rhythmic metric theory, Schenkerian analysis, and performance studies. He has published on these subjects in journals including Music Analysis and Music Theory Spectrum, as well as in essay collections devoted to Brahms and Schubert. Professor McClelland's first book, Brahms and the Scherzo, was published in 2010, and with David Beach, he co-authored a textbook, Analysis of 18th and 19th Century Musical Works in the Classical Tradition, which appeared in 2012. Current projects include co-editing with Russell Hartenberger the forthcoming Cambridge Companion to Rhythm and a study on microtiming and metric dissonance in Brahms's late piano pieces. Would you please help me welcome Ryan?
Thanks, Stan. Like Sarah, I'm going to start out with just a few comments on my trajectory and how we get from where we start as faculty members potentially to other roles within the university. I started at the University of Toronto in 2004 as an assistant professor, and my first experience in an administrative role was relatively limited as the area coordinator for theory and composition. At the time it was a joint unit, and that was relatively limited in terms of just looking at course offerings within the unit, considering staffing situations for sabbaticals, looking at department policies, just in scheduling placement tests, teaching assistant assignments, that kind of service that most faculty members, I think, do at some point during their careers. But I think one of the important things with thinking about academic administration is what your experience is like when you're doing smaller roles or occasional roles or acting roles, that they can be very good indicators for what your potential interest is in further work in that area. So I guess just something that I would say is always, to be open to trying out roles that come your way that are of a relatively limited nature, because I've certainly found that they can be helpful in terms of my thinking about future directions. So and at the time, of course, I had some committee responsibilities as well. But it was really in 2013 when I moved more into the area of academic administration and started to kind of rebalance my workload. And since 2013, I have been an associate dean role and been on a 50% teaching role, which in my institution means teaching one course per semester. And for me, that's something which I really value, the ability to remain connected to students and teaching. My role, as Stan mentioned, Associate Dean, Academic and Student Affairs. It's actually quite similar to what we heard from Sarah. Different institutions have slightly different nomenclatures and different sizes. So Associate Dean, I think, parallels in a number of things that Sarah talked about in her Associate Director role. So perhaps just a word about my institution, the music program. It's a large, comprehensive music school program. We have about 900 students, 600 undergrads, 300 grads, and bachelor's, master's, doctoral programs across performance and a wide range of other areas of musical study. So my particular areas of oversight are really twofold. One is oversight of the entire undergraduate programs in terms of course offerings, programs, staffing, especially hiring of part-time faculty to cover changing needs within our undergraduate teaching. But then more broadly, my other role is sort of oversight of all curriculum and development of new programs, both at the undergrad and graduate level. And as Kathryn said, Sarah.
I'm honored.
As Sarah said, dealing with all the paperwork that comes from those things. In Canada, we don't go through NASM accreditation, but we do go through external reviews of new programs, and every 7 years the entire program undergoes an external review. So that's sort of our equivalent of NASM accreditation. And any sort of changes to ongoing programs, and that, in fact, that was one of the larger things that I accomplished early on in my tenure as Associate Dean was sort of a standardization of the undergraduate degree programs at 120 credits, as opposed to having sort of varying numbers of credits in varying programs. Well, in addition to the oversight of curriculum program, there is the student services. I'm fortunate to be supported by a very strong staff team in our registrar's office. But there are obviously things that do come forward to me in terms of student advising. More often it's in terms of issues with student performance, either in terms of their progress in the degree or in terms of code of conduct. Sometimes it's on a much more pleasant note, such as nominating students for university awards and external scholarships and that sort of thing. I'm also responsible for undergraduate recruitment and the admissions process. Again, I'm supported by a couple of staff in that area, but my role does include reviewing all of the admissions files as they come in each year, and working with the admissions committee on those decisions, and then being in touch with students to whom we make offers and following up with them throughout the tail end of the recruitment season. One of the areas where I've sort of had to develop and learn new things in this role is in regards to union relations. Part of my role is as the administrator in the music program who takes the lead on all matters involving our unions. We have both staff unions and faculty unions for part-time faculty, and also our graduate teaching assistants are unionized. Full-time faculty members are not unionized at the University of Toronto, but almost everyone else is, and so dealing with any issues with regards to job postings and selection of candidates in hiring processes. We do have a music program in the Faculty of Arts and Science, which I am the coordinator of. So our Faculty of Music, even though it is a self-standing faculty, also has kind of a dual function as a department within Arts and Science for those courses. And so there's some liaising work there between Faculty of Music and Arts and Science. And then kind of assistance with governance and planning, helping to prepare various sorts of documents that might be required either by our central administration or externally. Speaking of short-term roles that give one experiences, during my 7 years in my associate dean role, I have had the experience for 1 year of serving as acting dean of our faculty when my dean was on sabbatical in 2016-17. And that was a very good learning experience because it does bring one into a whole host of other issues, especially the responsibility for budget and resources, and dealing with everyone within our building in terms of how those are allocated, and dealing with issues with the building itself, either in terms of routine maintenance, approvals, or deciding how to deal with certain situations, or more long-term renovations. I was fortunate we had some grant money come in during my year in the dean's office that allowed us to completely renovate our electroacoustic music studio, and working with consultants and architects and acousticians on the project. It's an entirely different kind of experience than what I have in my associate dean portfolio. At the dean level, of course, one is chairing various sorts of committees, such as tenure committees and faculty search committees, and dealing with faculty personnel issues. And then there is the side of fundraising, advancement, donor relations, alumni relations, university relations, the way in which we make our program have a greater degree of prominence, both within the campus and external to the campus. And in a city like Toronto, it often involves working together with arts organizations and various concert organizations in the city to build those connections and to help our faculty members as well as they strive to integrate what they're doing with broader aspects in the community. I guess what I thought I might close with were just a couple of thoughts on what I think you might consider if you're thinking about going into academic administration. That is to say, what are the things that changed about my daily life that I like, and that you might like or might not like. And so I came up with a list of about 5 things that I would say are fundamentally different about my daily life now than it was prior to 2013. So I would say you might consider academic administration if you like to know what's going on around you, both the good and the bad. If you're quite happy with focusing on your students, your teaching, your research, and it's not that important to you what's going on around you, then maybe academic administration is not the thing, right? I think for me, I like knowing what's going on around me. I'm curious what others are doing, both within the music program and other parts of the university, and how things fit together. You might consider academic administration if you like a schedule that's unpredictable. Students change from year to year, but the leading tone always rises and sevenths always fall, right? I mean, of course, we innovate pedagogically from year to year, but I've certainly found that my schedule and my daily life is much less predictable in administration. There are always meetings coming up of different sorts. People who I don't know book things into my schedule. And even, in the morning, some crisis can arise that really needs dealt with, at least in a brief email. Maybe it can't be resolved during a day, but it will need touched on. There are always things that come up in a day that simply can't be left to the next day, that sometimes they need just a quick response, right? You might consider academic administration if you enjoy meeting new people. Something which I certainly found was that you're always meeting new people in administration. There is a certain insularity that happens when you're seeing the same students every day, you're working with your same close colleagues, and the experience as an administrator is much more social and interactive. And even in a role such as mine, which is really within the Faculty of Music, I'm very often the music representative on various university-wide committees. Right? I know my counterparts in other faculties who might have similar challenges and have colleagues there that I can reach out to talk to things about, or experts in central administration that I reach out to on various topics. Right? So I'm always meeting new people and having people contact me. You might consider academic administration if you like having a broad impact. Right? Yes, we impact the students we teach, but certainly since I've gone into administration, I felt that I have a broader impact on more people within the program, and to me that's satisfying. And the last thing is kind of related, which is that as an academic administrator, I think it's important that you enjoy helping others flourish. That there is a sense in which you do have less time for your own teaching and for your research, and it's important that you find satisfaction in making the people around you as successful as they can be. And for me, I think that's really the measure of a good academic administrator, is how successful and how happy and how productive can you make everyone around you, students, other faculty members, and staff. And I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Ryan. Let me introduce our third speaker, and then after that we'll have a chance for some discussion. So our third panelist here is Matthew Shaftel, who is currently Dean of the College of Fine Arts at Ohio University, where he has focused on helping the college's 6 schools to share and develop a distinctive role in the arts community transformation in the region, state, and well beyond. He has previously served as Dean of the Westminster College of the Arts at Rider University, including the Grammy Award-winning Westminster Choir College. Shaftel also served as Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs and as a Professor of Music Theory at Florida State University, where he led the development of a signature general ed program, Liberal Studies for the 21st Century. He has published numerous books and articles and has served as editor of Music Theory Online and publications chair for SMT. Would you please help me welcome Matthew?
Hi, good morning. I'm curious, how many people here in the room are already involved in administration in some way? Okay, good number of you. How many of you would like, or maybe not after the first 2 talks, but thought they came to this meeting kind of thinking, well, that might be something I'd be interested in? Okay, awesome. How many of you are grad students? Terrific. And how many of you are undergrad students? These are our undergrad students from Ohio University, so I just want to call you guys out. I can't believe that you're here. Thank you. It's awesome. Kudos to you guys. So I had a dream last night, and I'm not kidding, unfortunately. I was deep in the ocean. and oh yes, and it was stormy. Of course, there were lots of sharks, and they were ravenous. And there was no land in sight. Oh yes, and there were a bunch of fish. And the fish were swimming around and had no idea there were sharks. And what I had to do, even though, oh yes, I forgot I couldn't swim because I don't know how to swim, I had to call a committee meeting and organize a bunch of subcommittees to figure out how we were going to get away from the sharks. But of course, nobody believed there were sharks. So this is a recurring dream. In fact, it looks like a lot of my everyday life. So it only partially a joke. So just like when I discovered that I was deep in the ocean, my falling into academic administration was a total surprise to me. 2 years before I officially went into administration at Florida State University, I was giving a pre-opera talk to a bunch of seniors. We had a really great senior development program, not college seniors, but senior people. I had organized a private performance. I was, doing the thing where we talk about how great opera is, and I made a gentle ask for some financial support for the students. And there was a dean of the College of Social Sciences in the room, and she came up to me afterwards and she said, "You are going to be a dean someday." And I almost fainted because that seemed like, my nose started to bleed because I felt like, oh, deans are something that you don't even look them straight in the eye because they're dangerous. They're sharks. So I really had no interest. I loved teaching too much. I had no skills. I still don't. And the thought of that position, just as I said, just seemed so far out of reach. So, of course, 2 years later, I never thought to be wary when the phone in my office rang. The phone in my office never rings, ever. So I answered it. Yeah, right. Exactly. So I answered, and it was the provost. And of course, I was like, "Oh, you called me." I felt like the violist in the orchestra for a minute. Sorry, it's my favorite viola joke. I'll tell you some other time. And she said, "Hey, would you chair the Gen Ed committee for the university?" And I thought, well, that's actually my favorite committee. It never meets. I've been on it for 4 years. We haven't had a single meeting. I didn't even know who else was on it. So I said, "Sure, yeah, I'd love to do that. That's a great duty. Check the box. You get the points. You don't have to go to anything. It's great." And then she called me the next day, and I answered the phone again. I didn't learn from the first one, and she says, "Oh, and I forgot to mention that the legislature just passed a law. We're going to have to completely revise Gen Ed. Oh, and by the way," I want to say the sharks are circling, but by the way, you have 6 months before it has to be in place, and of course the faculty senate has to approve it. And one of these tasks that seems Herculean. It wasn't very long into the process, which actually went very well, that somebody said, "Oh, well, you need to be an associate dean," and brought out their sword and tap, tap. I was an associate dean, but still teaching full-time. Andrew, I know we talked about this earlier today, because you can't change your life within a week in academics. So I was an associate dean, which lasted a very short period of time, and then once we delivered a new Gen Ed curriculum, that was pretty cool, actually. And I have to thank Jeremy for giving, on a really late night car ride, for giving me an idea and pulling that into Gen Ed at Florida State. And it's just amazing how things happen. Anyway, I immediately got whisked into the provost's office. I did not pass go. I did not collect $200. I was never a chair or a dean. I was all of a sudden an associate vice president for academic affairs, in charge of all teaching and learning at the university, career success initiatives. What do I know about career success? Are in charge of our Central American campus. and working very closely with our accreditation team about assessment. Thankfully, I was a quick learner, and that was an amazing opportunity. But I will say that I very quickly got tired of not working with creative people anymore. I found the further I went into the university administrative structure, the less people are willing to be creative. So it wouldn't be uncommon. I'd have a conversation, and everybody would always roll their eyes at me because, of course, I could still be naive. Right? Oh, well, it seems like that's a silly idea, and they would go, oh, the music guy, right? At a big university, 40,000 students, we'd have a conversation like, well, this only affects 1% of our students, so this is a really good idea. And I would say, well, that's 400 students that are going to lose health insurance. Isn't that kind of a bad thing? And people go, oh, the music guy.
Doing the math.
Yeah, right.
Doing the math.
I know, exactly, doing the math, right? So as soon as I got a phone call one day, again, this one is on my cell phone, so that seems safe. And I was offered a position as a dean at Westminster Choir College and College for the Arts at a small private school in New Jersey. And I jumped, and it was one of the most exciting, thrilling rides in my life. I really knew nothing about what I was doing, but was just jumped in like I jump into everything, mostly eyes open, but head first, and discovered that I was just really, really lucky to be able to work with such an incredible group of people and work with students. There number of interesting things happens in that position, but I now work at Ohio University. I'm the Dean of the College of Fine Arts there. It's a great public institution that sits at this incredible, exciting, and difficult intersection between access and excellence. What we do is amazing, and this work that I've been doing is the most challenging and rewarding I've done in my entire life. I work every day with some of the most creative, thoughtful, and meaningful individuals in the world. And the work we do changes communities, changes regions, and individual lives for the better every single day. So I'm going to talk a little bit about skills that I knew I had, and I know that you have. Schools that I didn't know I had, but also you probably have, but don't know you have. And then schools that I wish I didn't have to develop, but did. And then I have 3 myths I wanna tackle. So on the range of skills that I knew I had, when I answered the phone that day, I knew I had many useful skills that all musicians, especially music theorists, have. Analytical and problem-solving skills, teaching and public speaking skills, the ability to manage multiple priorities, ability to recover and revise in the face of both constructive and very difficult critique, ability to work at funny times and in odd places, critical thinking and quick thinking. All those things develop in our classrooms or working with colleagues, navigating an environment in an academic discipline. Those are skills that you all have. I have them too. Skills that I didn't know I had, but discovered pretty quickly, is interpersonal relationship skills and management skills. Turns out that working with undergraduate students every day and a large group of graduate student GAs, running a summer program in Italy, leading a not-profit board. I was also a music minister at a huge church where I was really a lousy manager for many years, but learned managing volunteers is a lot like managing faculty because you need them, right? And you can't fire a volunteer, so you have to convince everybody it's the right thing to do, and sometimes you fail at that radically. Running committees, editing, MTO, those are all the basis for any success that I might have today. The skills of listening deeply, brainstorming collectively, helping others to develop and then share in a vision, and thinking about assigning the right person to the right task at the right time. Those are things that I didn't realize I had developed, but definitely had. Financial management. Obviously, that's a critical part of my day-to-day life. So running small budgets in my work with nonprofits, my church work, my summer festival. I was in charge of the university living learning community, had a small budget there. Even things like preparing my own taxes and figuring out how to jump through tax loopholes. My dad's an accounting professor, so it is the basis of my relationship with him, is arguing about tax law. And let's be honest, we're music theorists. We know how to save a buck, right? So data analysis. This one, I don't know why I never realized this would happen. But reading a musical score, that activity. In fact, I even do the same activity. I get my cup of coffee and I sit down and I'm like, I'm going to get into it. But I'm not reading a musical score. I'm reading a spreadsheet. But it's the same activity. Like it's a bunch of data presented on a page that only is a sort of marginal representation of what's really happening. And we, as music theorists, were used to drawing some kind of narrative out of it. There are multiple possible narratives, and you have to figure out which one is going to be the most realistic or the most convincing or the most true, and which one is going to achieve your goals. And you spend a lot of time doing that. Turns out reading a spreadsheet is almost an identical experience for me. And in fact, I enjoy it. Sometimes what you discover doesn't make you happy. But I actually like rich data sets, and I appreciate that opportunity. Creative problem solving and building a solution. So complex problem solving is at the very core of what we do as music theorists. Everything from how you might wordsmith a paragraph to how we help our students create a successful argument to building a syllabus. Creative problem solving is kind of central. Cultivation and fundraising. Again, something I didn't think I would be good at, but 40% or more of my time is devoted to fundraising. I, as of about a month ago, have raised a total of nearly $40 million in my few years as dean. And I just never imagined that this would be part of what I did for a living. But it draws every day on skills that I developed in the classroom or in work with colleagues. The interpersonal skills I mentioned earlier, developing a meaningful relationship and working closely with partners and colleagues. These gifts are always a collaborative effort. A big gift requires all kinds of intersections. You have a partner in the philanthropic world. You have partners at the university that you are working with. Often you're bringing in a faculty member or a student to make sure that the conversation is really about how is that gift going to become transformative. That stuff you already know how to do because you do it all the time in your classroom. Storytelling. Storytelling is so important. Telling a truthful story, and then building on the understanding of the gap that needs to be filled. So your stories have gaps in them, just like they do in the classroom, and making sure that gap is the right one for the right person at the right time. That is very useful in my position. And then persistence and patience. Well, I'm lying about the patience part. I didn't learn that. I don't have that. But on the persistence part, the persistence that you develop in classroom teaching and publishing applies to fundraising as well. So there's a right and a wrong time to ask. There's a time to come back to someone who might not be ready to make a transformational gift. The impatience I feel about the need today actually turns out to be useful. So I'll just go ahead and cultivate that. And then, of course, intuition. So this isn't really a skill, but the work that you're doing, taking small risks in your daily life, taking small risks in your classroom, seeing how they turn out, that develops really great intuition about people and about choices that you might make. I think that's just part of also getting older, as much as I wish that weren't happening. So skills that I wish I didn't have to develop, but I have them now. Stress management. There is just no question that moving into administration requires long hours, managing multiple priorities simultaneously, and pushing your own limits every single day. And stamina. I'm an introverted extrovert, or an extroverted introvert, one of the two. In any event, I was definitely not naturally built for days where I have 16 separate meetings. That was 2 days last week. My assistant started scheduling 30-minute meetings because I just couldn't fit them all in. Or a week and a half ago, I spent 60 hours in New York City and took 14 separate fundraising meetings and an alumni dinner with 12 people in it. If you're not built for that, that makes it really hard to do my job. So my first 6 months in administration reminded me of the 6 months I spent in the Soviet Union, where I was just exhausted trying to figure out what the heck was going on all the time. And that ability to kind of start to understand the language in the Soviet Union and to be understanding what was happening really was similar to the first 6 months in administration, totally fueled by coffee and adrenaline. I will say that the coffee and right, exactly, vodka, right. That hasn't really changed.
Better than vodka.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, we talk a lot about day drinking in my office. So, but your stamina waxes and wanes, and the ability to really say it's time to take care of yourself, to yourself, that's just really important. There's no way around it, because you won't last if you don't. I'm not all that good at that, but it's important. Healthy empathy. Oh my gosh. I think that's what you were talking about earlier when you looked at me and you said that the data analysis skills aren't what got you there. So the ability to sincerely empathize, actually empathize with the people that work with you and for you without taking on their emotions and losing our critical thinking facilities is the key to managing difficult conversations and situations. Strategic communication and political savvy. So the ability to advocate and communicate strategically in a complex environment is so important. Knowing how to navigate all levels of communication and to transition from social media to email to a phone call to an office visit to a coffee to a walk and talk to a sit-down meal is key. Every message deserves strategic consideration of how it is delivered, to whom, or when. Every single message, because it is so easy to go wrong. Crisis management. We've now heard about this a couple times, and then in even like the 10 minutes when I was standing out here, I've heard of so many crises. Higher ed has changed. It's just a different environment. Enrollments at all but the private elite colleges are shrinking rapidly. The population shift to the west and south is very, very real. Here in Ohio, for instance, we're predicting a 15% reduction in the overall number of students going to college. Oklahoma, I'm sure it's the same kind of thing. Well, okay, good for you.
We'll talk about that.
Right.
That's something I was going to talk about.
Midwest, in particular, northern Midwest, Northeast, small private schools are closing. It's a tough environment. In my 20 years in higher ed, I can only remember 3 years out of 20 in which budget reductions were not a critical part of the conversation. My years as a dean have been marked by creatively addressing budget reductions of 5 to 10% every single year. The closure of campus that I managed, several lawsuits in which I was subpoenaed, the near bankruptcy of a university where I worked, the layoff, and in some cases the rehiring of numerous faculty and staff, and any number of other crises, student faculty safety, emergencies. Crisis management is just part of everyday life. Through trial by fire again and again, I have developed some kind of ability to manage in a crisis, to stay calm, think rationally, communicate clearly, and I hope effectively, to reassure as necessary and appropriate, outline creative solutions, prioritize action steps, and steward the right resources under significant amounts of pressure. This is certainly not anything I hoped to develop. But I did, and they're not really fun parts of the job, but every single administrative job has some of this. And it turns out that the new higher ed landscape requires this. And this is just part of what it's going to be. So staying trustworthy, honest, stalwart, thoughtful, empathetic, calm in the face of these challenges while pushing when necessary and standing aside when appropriate is just very important. So really quick, 3 myths. One myth, everyone else knows what they're doing and you don't. 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their careers. The bigger the responsibility, the more often you feel it. Learning to manage this and to simply work to the best of your ability without defeating yourself is very critical. Type A's, or this is myth 2, Type A's or Type B's or ISTJs or ENFJs make better administrators. No matter what type of person you are, you bring something to the table, and to be successful, you must be willing to build a diverse team. I always run late, always. And I generally finish big projects just before the deadline or just after it. It is what it is. I have to learn to live with some of the things that I am. I have a team of people that includes folks for whom that is very annoying. And that's good for me because it helps to keep me on track. I also work with people who are so creative and big thinking that they need me to keep them on track. It turns out I'm kind of average for the arts, which is nice. In business, it's a little different. But I am really happy to have such a diverse team. And of course, different jobs at different times require different kinds of people. Sometimes trains need to be creatively run on time. Sometimes the entire train system needs to be reconfigured. And sometimes we need to invent a new mode of transportation. Third myth, you need to wait to become an administrator. And this is particularly to the students in the room. I have a 20-year-old daughter who has decided, and she must be the only one in the nation, that her goal is to become a dean. Dad, how do I become a dean? Well, it's a little strange. But my answer to that is if you're not particularly tied to higher ed, it's not a very direct path, right? It's not something you really choose to do at the age of 20 because you have to become a faculty member for a long time and you have to really love being a faculty member in order to move to administration. And there are just better pathways to administration. So last year alone, there were 21,000 job postings in arts administration. And I'm not trying to convince you to leave your positions, but, and there were only 3,000 degree completions. That's a huge gap. There are lots and lots of great work that needs to be done. And so if you have a doctorate or a master's degree and some great experience and you're documenting your skills, think about whether academic administration is the right path for you, because there's lots of other ways to have a fulfilling life in the arts. So in summary, my work in administration is sometimes exhausting, always exhilarating, and very highly fulfilling. I have a personal mission to make meaningful and a high-quality college education available to as many students as possible and to be a catalyst for social mobility and bringing the power of creative thinking to today's persistent problems. And there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not thankful for the privilege to serve this mission to the best of my ability. So thanks.
So I can't speak for the entire professional development committee, but I think I'm safe to say that none of us imagined that this conversation would compare academic administration to the Soviet Union. Not that it isn't apt, but I just didn't see that coming. Before we go on, I actually have breaking news. If you arrived a little late, you may have missed my announcement that Kathryn Nolan isn't able to join us today. She's ill back in London, Ontario. But as our other speakers are talking, and you may have seen me scrambling around on my iPad here, she has actually, in the last 15 minutes, delivered a short statement that she'd like me to read so she can participate here. So let me do that, and you'll have to imagine that I'm much more accomplished and much more a Vebern scholar than I am right now. Kathryn Nolan, she is the Associate Dean of Graduate Studies at the Don Wright Faculty of Music at Western University in London, Ontario. She has a PhD from Yale, as well as a Master's in Philosophy and Music Theory from Yale, an MA from McGill, and a Bachelor of Music in Composition and Music Theory from McGill. Prior to her appointment at Western, she taught at the University of Alberta, at McGill, at Yale, and at Vanier College in Montreal. Her research interests include modernist music of the 20th century, particularly the late music of Anton Webern, music of the late 20th century, transformational theory, and mathematical models of music theory and her history. And her publications, as many of us know, appear in periodicals such as JMT, Spectrum, Music Theory Online, the Canadian University Music Review, and essay collections such as the Cambridge History of Western Music Theory, the Princeton Companion to Mathematics, and the Reader's Guide to Music, History, Theory, and Criticism. So I'm just going to read her statement, and if I stumble, please forgive me. I've only had it a few minutes longer than you'll have had it when I read it to you. So from here on, the first person is Kathryn Nolan and not Stan Kleppinger. At the time I took on my first administrative role at Western, I had never given serious thought to most of the questions that now appear in the program for this session, such as, how do I know if administration is right for me? When is the right time to consider an administrative position? It seems that administration came calling when the time was right. I've heard that expressed here already. When I arrived at Western, I understood well the three areas of academic responsibility, teaching, research, and service, but my energy was directed almost entirely to teaching and research. I was glad to contribute to service in the form of committee work, but I was not drawn to service in its own right. I saw no true value in administration. My service contributions were generally assigned to me, not chosen by me. My world as a new young professor was my office and my classroom. I think this is a common experience. With growing maturity and experience, my world became larger. I became aware of practices and policies in my department, mostly in the area of curriculum, which needed attention. I began to see that I could address some of these issues, and more importantly, I began to see that I could get satisfaction from using my voice in such matters. With tenure came greater security in expressing my concerns and a greater commitment to the university, and I began to see real value in holding an administrative post by having that voice that must be heard. I came to Western as a member of the Department of Music Theory and Composition, a department that no longer exists. As the name implies, the department included theorists and composers, and this group worked very well together. We shared many values regarding musical repertoire and materials. Eventually, I was selected to become chair of music theory and composition, and by that time, this seemed like a natural move for me. I had wonderful colleagues, and although we did not agree on everything, we respected each other, and I had developed useful skills in diplomacy. Being the representative of the department was satisfying and empowering. There was a separate department of music history, and over time, the music theorists began to recognize that their affinity with musicology was as strong or stronger than their affinity with composition. During my first couple of years as chair of music theory and composition, the central administration at Western exerted some pressure on the dean of the Faculty of Music to amalgamate these two small departments, and this seemed like a smart move to me for academic as well as administrative reasons. For 1 year, while the chair of music and theory and composition, I was also appointed acting chair of music history, and I was asked by the dean to work toward building consensus in the two departments for amalgamation. This charge was intimidating, but I believed in the amalgamation and worked hard as representative of both departments to help everyone involved see that there were educational advantages for all our students to becoming a single department. This was unbelievably exciting for me. It was not without difficulty because there was considerable resistance by some individuals to any change in academic structure, but I persevered, and at the end of that academic year, the formerly two departments voted by a strong majority to amalgamate into a single department called the Department of Music Research and Composition. I was then appointed its first chair. My experience shows vividly how intimately administration is connected with leadership. As a department chair in the Faculty of Music, I had perhaps greater opportunity than usual to pursue leadership not only within a department, but within the administrative structure of the Faculty of Music. After a few years as chair of the Department of Research and Composition, the role of Associate Dean for Graduate Studies became vacant. This role had long been appealing to me because of its focus on graduate students and programs and the opportunity to work with Western School of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies. I was appointed Associate Dean of Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Music in 2012, and I still hold that position. In this role, I represent music, not music theory specifically, to senior administrators across the entire university. I love the excitement and challenge of raising awareness of the breadth and diversity of music as both a temporal field, performance and production, and a non-temporal field, texts, culture, etc., along with its connections with the other arts and social sciences, the performing or fine arts, mathematics, etc. There is a lot of misunderstanding about the multifaceted nature of music within a university, and being a significant voice to helping to dispel some of that misunderstanding is enormously satisfying. I would agree with the notion that qualities that draw us into music theory, such as structured thinking, problem solving, following articulated principles and guidelines, etc., are valuable in administration, but they must be combined with skills in negotiation and diplomacy that I find are shared with scholars in all disciplines. And I would also agree that taking on an administrative role increases the challenges of scholarly productivity in our field, as is the case with administrators from any discipline. I have learned that thinking in terms of academic leadership rather than administration captures the joy and satisfaction that is inherent in such roles. For those attracted to leadership roles in the university, I would encourage them to think in terms of the skills in persuasion and diplomacy they will need to demonstrate. Administrative or leadership roles will differ from university to university as a result of the larger university structure within which the study of music is situated. Playing a part in making one's university a better place is its own reward. I think Kathryn might be watching online. Can we thank her for these comments? And in addition to thanking Kathryn, that pause gives me an opportunity to reorient myself as the as the narrator for this session. What I'd like to do now is this panel and the members of the Professional Development Committee have kind of worked to build a short set of starter questions. I'd like for this to get a little more informal, and I'm gonna ask these questions of the entire panel. I invite all of you to respond, and I'm hoping that can gently morph into a conversation with all of you. If there are other questions or other perspectives that you'd like to offer, we're going to have some time for all of us to make use of the microphones. I'll remind everybody that, again, that this session is being streamed, so as you speak, please do speak directly in a microphone, not only for the sake of everybody in this room, but for people listening remotely. And when we do ask questions, you'll notice the microphone is angled kind of oddly. The camera for this session is in the back of the room, and it's helpful for everyone's sake if, as we ask questions, that we can look toward the camera, so we're kind of giving you an opportunity to make eye contact with our presenters while also facing the screen, so to speak. But let me start by asking a couple questions here for all of you to respond to as you see fit. The first two kind of go hand in hand. The first question that we had come up with together was, what are the qualities that make a good academic administrator? And that's one that you all kind of touched on, but maybe it's a chance for us to kind of encapsulate and crystallize that set of qualities. And related to this, and Matthew kind of touched on this at the end of his talk, but Sarah and Ryan, maybe you want to respond. What are the specific skills that you needed to develop or that you found yourself tapping onto as you took on administrative roles? And how did you develop those skills that you didn't have but needed? So what are the qualities that make a good academic administrator? What are the skills that you needed to develop?
Okay, I'll go ahead and go first. I think we have three really rather different roles that we're playing, and so on a certain level, there's a different skills and different qualities, but I do think it comes back to getting stuff done. And I know that sounds, but you don't want to deal with the paperwork, you've got to deal with the paperwork. The other thing is, I know one of the things my faculty tells me pretty consistently is they appreciate how I run a meeting. We've all been in meetings that are soul-sucking, and I work really hard for my meetings to not take any more time than they need to take, while you still have to let everybody, people need to be able to have their say, you need to listen, but you need to keep them on track. You need to keep them going. You need to not have a meeting if it can be done over email. And sometimes it can, sometimes you need to meet. But then to go along with that, I think one of my greatest skills is as a facilitator. And so facilitating the work to be done in the meeting, facilitating, and Ryan touched on this, facilitating everybody else's work. And that often means you have to do a lot of groundwork. And then you have to be willing for that groundwork to be blown up in the meeting. But if you come into a meeting and say, we need to do this, often nothing gets done. If you come and say, we need to do this, I've got a first draft, they're going to be really quick to tell you what's wrong with your draft. And that's okay, because then you get them working on things. And so a lot of preparation for the meetings to have a meeting go well. And then also a lot of just coffees, emails. I go to people's offices all the time. I actually rarely have meetings in my office because there's a real visual that I will come to their office and discuss these things. And while I'm a lower level administrator, because of my other roles, I have like daily interactions with the provost, and everybody knows it. And so the more I can keep in touch with them and not look like I'm with the provost is really important. So I think really, I wish I had a degree in psychology. And learning how to read people, learning to know who you can send a one-sentence email to and not offend, and who you have to go have the discussion with, who you need to ask, how are your kids doing before you get into the discussion, or things like that. And you really have to work it, and it will depend on what the issue is. But I've gotten a lot of stuff done, accomplished that could have gone really poorly by doing a lot of prep work and doing a lot of in the hallways talking, hey, by the way, this is coming down the pipeline. Don't surprise people. Do not surprise people. Don't say, oh, I'm going to talk about this in a meeting, and you can give me your feedback then. Give them 24, 48 hours to think about something so that you don't get knee-jerk reactions, which will almost always be, don't change anything, right? So I'll stop with that. I think, did that answer all your questions? Oh, no, I have one more thing that. To develop you need to develop a strong understanding of the School of Music, the College of Fine Arts, the university as a whole, and how radically different a music theorist job is from the clarinetist job. We're at a big football school. That clarinet professor is out there recruiting every day to try to fill all the slots. I really feel for her. And it's radically different from me. What we do in the College of Fine Arts is radically different than what they do in engineering. And you have to understand better what they do. You also need to really develop your way of translating what the schools of music do, what the College of Fine Arts do, to everyone, whether it be the provost, who's a classics professor, the VPR, who's an engineering professor who just came from Purdue. He's never dealt with the arts. You have to be able to translate creative activity in a meaningful way to these people. You also have to develop how to translate higher education to the public. And in the state of Oklahoma, there's not always a positive view of higher education. And it's vital that we all translate to everyone how important this is. And the more you can learn how to translate and how the whole thing flows, the more you'll understand ripple effects of your actions and your decisions, which is rather important. So.
I think most of the attributes have been touched on already. I would just reinforce so many of the things that Sarah said, especially the listening aspect, that making colleagues, students feel like you're really listening to them, understanding what they're saying, and it's so important to hear that and to communicate that you understand the source of an anxiety or something before you take the next step of addressing the solution. And regardless of whether it's a solution they want to hear or one they don't want to hear, that first stage of listening and empathy, as Matthew said as well, is so important. I think just openness to alternatives, and then using the analytical thinking as a sort of a second stage. I think we all become much more aware of just the diversity of viewpoints and ways of addressing situations the longer we're in administration. That when we're on our path as a faculty member in teaching and research, we tend to have a more narrow view of how things go and how we do things. And I think that just becoming open to alternate perspectives and then really thinking analytically and critically about what the best way forward is, and collaborating with others. And just making decisions as transparent as possible with respect to some sort of policy or precedent, which is not to say that one doesn't recognize the uniqueness of particular situations, but there has to be a sense in which you are perceived as being fair in your dealings. And fair is not the same as giving people what they want all the time. And I think that's a very important distinction, because good administrators need to be able to say no. It's just why are you having to say no in certain situations, and how to that one has to look at the sort of the longer term strategy sometimes, that perhaps some uncomfortable, difficult conversations in the short term are the way to long-term solutions, and always keeping that in mind, balancing kind of short-term and long-term thinking, I think is an important quality to develop. So just briefly on the second part of your question, Stan, the skills that I've developed over the past few years were, I think, more in terms of just knowledge of certain areas, like human resources and certain policies, and even in my case, provincial laws, regulations, so especially around accessibility and human rights and policies that I might not have thought about as precisely before, in terms of hiring, firing, severance, labor relations principles. Just budgeting, accounting, those sorts of things were the areas where I felt that I had to learn the most over the past several years, and then just some very mundane things like becoming an expert user of certain features of Outlook and Excel that I hadn't worried about before. Like all the easy scheduling features that now exist in Outlook, if everyone in your organization is an Outlook user, right? And that I just never bothered to learn those before.
No more
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome. I already talked a lot, too much, like usual, but I will say, I just want to underscore this advocacy role. It is just so important, and this is something, don't wait until you become an administrator to be an advocate. If you can't, in 30 seconds, well, I can't do anything in 30 seconds, but if you can, in 1 minute, articulate exactly why what you do is the most important thing to the university, you're missing an opportunity. So think the research out there is just getting richer and richer and deeper and thicker by the day. I'm going to point you all to the Penn College of Social Science data on cultural resources in like communities, and the kind of reduction in 20% reduction in cases of child abuse, for instance, if there are cultural resources invested in a community. That kind of data, just to be able to pull that off of the top of your head all the time, that's important today, no matter what your job is. If you like the arts, talk about it. That's really important.
I'm going to re-emphasize being able to translate it to multiple constituencies. You have to be able to translate it to your colleagues within the larger university. You have to be able to translate it to the administrators, to the regents, and to the general public, to donors, and they all take a different vocabulary, of different speaking style. And I don't care if you're an administrator or not. It's vital that we do that in general.
Let me change gears a little bit here and talk about, and this is kind of a work-life kind of question, and also kind of a how did you know this is what you wanted to do kind of question. In order to put administration on your plate, there certainly has to have been an extent to which you've taken other parts of your career off your plate. And I think I think we've heard it's a little different for each of you depending on your position and how much of your FTE, how much of your workload it involves. But I guess the question is this: do you feel like you've been able to maintain a connection with music theory while you've been working in an administrative role, or is there an extent to which you've had to give that up to go to administration? Is that a balance that you've been able to massage that you find personally satisfying or not? Or, what perspective could you offer to those of us in the room who might be interested in going this way but are thinking, yeah, I'd love to serve my university, and yes, I'm interested in Excel spreadsheets and in the Soviet Union and sharks. And you have to watch the whole session in order to get all the metaphors we're using now. But I'm concerned about giving up the things I'm interested in now because I love teaching and I love my students and I love this. There's this book I want to write and there's this research project I want to finish. How have you balanced that? Have you found you've had to give that up to a certain extent? Do you miss it, or has the balance been satisfactory to you?
I have no balance. I careen wildly from one end of the spectrum to the other. Really, it goes flying in every direction, whatever the next deadline is. So on Wednesday, I have to give I agreed like 9 months ago to give a talk at our university. And so as soon as this is done, I have to go back to start working on that. And that's the way my life is. So if anybody can tell me how to do balance, I'd love to know. I'll admit my scholarly production has slowed. I make sure it hasn't stopped, but it's at a glacial pace, pre-global warming. But I do make sure to get something done every year. I still do teach, and that is actually one of my concerns. It's not so much teaching. I don't like giving grades. But I do get I'm an introvert, total introvert, and I get a lot of my life force from my students. And they're helping them through what they think are hard times, which aren't, or helping them through some really hard times. Also, just seeing them flourish and seeing them take off. They give me a lot of they fill my soul. Is what they do. I've become a cliche on that level. So I, in trying to balance things, I have really failed miserably, but I have come up with one general rule that I will never violate. And it is, I do not drop the ball on my kids. And I have 2.5 sets of kids, I'm gonna say. One is I have a 6-year-old son who was 3 when I became associate director and faculty senate chair, and everything exploded, and I refuse to drop the ball on my son. And so if I'm supposed to go into work to go to a concert or something like that, and he says, Mom, I want to go to the zoo, we go to the zoo. It's just not worth it. Some people know my story. I fought hard for him. I'm going to spend every day he wants to spend with him. And then I won't drop the ball on my students, especially my undergrads. It's just, they are more important than my research. Their daily life is more important than getting this latest report done. And so that's my line. I try not to drop the ball on my grad students. They would say I drop it, but I try to be very open with them. I have I'm advising a dissertation right now, and I tell him, here's my schedule, here's when I'm going to be able to get to your stuff, so that he knows what's going on, and it's very transparent. But that's my general rule of thumb. That's the way I've lived the last 3 years, and it has worked. That has worked. I have dropped the ball on me a little too much, especially this semester, and so I do think you need to put that in there. But again, never dropping the ball on my son is taking care of me also. So.
I have a very sad co-author sitting in the back of the room who knows how hard it has been to get this damn project done. I will say the book's coming out next month, so congratulations, and thank you, Greg, for your incredible patience with me. This has been way too long. I'm sorry. I had another book project that was kind of in the pipeline and came out 2 years ago, and it's done pretty well. And I'm just thankful for all the people who are just patient, because what I literally have to do is block off somewhere between 4 and 5 times the amount of time that I think I'm going to need to do something. That could be, 5-hour chunks or 3-hour chunks or 2-hour chunks or whatever it is. And I now take into doing that for everything, because I know that ultimately I'm going to fill 3/4 of it with something that I need to do that precedes that. That seems to be working kind of okay. But also making sure that I do at least one thing for myself and my family every week. I think family, thank God for family, because I have a 9-year-old and she just won't take no, right? So sometimes it just is the thing that you don't have time to do, and you just have to do it anyway. I will say one of the really important things is when we model good behavior for everybody else. So for instance, even though I'm often tempted to call people that work for me on the weekends, and sometimes I do, I generally try to avoid it, because I need them to come to work on Monday morning and be ready to tackle Mondays, and Mondays stink. So it's really important. On holidays, this is new for me, because I work at an institution where holidays and weekends are actual things. And that's beautiful. It doesn't mean we don't work on the weekends. It doesn't mean that we don't sometimes have an emergency during the holiday, but just a general respect for people as people first and their jobs second is pretty exciting. I live in a small town. I live next to the people I work with. So if I'm not nice to them, I'm in big trouble, because I'm going to run into them in the grocery store for sure. It does mean that I dress up to go to the farmer's market on the weekend. Something about which, my faculty tease me about. I never wear shorts in public, that kind of thing. But it really is that's so critical. But balance is really hard. But the work we do is important, and you have to make a decision at some point, that you're both going to take care of yourself to some extent and do the work that you're going to do with absolutely every ounce of your energy.
I have no magic solution. It's always a challenge finding the balance, and for me it's in organization and just prioritizing and keeping on top of what needs accomplished on a given day, on a given week. There is the danger with that approach of letting things that are very important but not urgent kind of slide and never get accomplished. But for me, just the organization of the multiple tasks is what helps me to get through the weeks. As far as my own balance, for me, it's very important to stay engaged with teaching, and I teach something every semester, and try to keep going on the research fronts as well. And in which case, I am able to set a bit more time aside during the summer to do some writing. And it's just an important value for me is that I remain connected with my colleagues in terms of research and teaching. And there may be different in different institutions, but I think in my own institution it's very helpful in terms of working with colleagues and the kind of facilitation and discussion. If I am in the trenches with them as well in teaching and research, and that they feel that we're engaged in the same activities, even though there's a substantial part of my time that's also involved in academic administration.
I guess maybe I should have asked this to start, but for each of you, is there an expectation as part of your duties that you do research? Is that built into your FTE, or?
It's not built into the FTE per se, but it's.
I know this is kind of an academic exercise.
It's built into the evaluation of faculty at the end of the year.
Including you?
Yes, including me. Yes.
Is that true for all three of you?
Yes.
No. I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a perspective I want to make sure gets articulated here today, is that different positions at different schools are going to have different expectations for research and scholarly production for administrators.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think it's different positions. I mean,
Right.
I don't. Very few deans teach, and it's just there's so much to do as a dean. At my university, if I actually was supposed to get another course release for the last 2 years, but we have nobody to teach my classes. I mean, and all it would end up doing is really screwing over my colleagues who we're really thin on music theory, and there's not a lot of extra music theorists floating around Oklahoma, and so I couldn't do. So I still am teaching those classes because of that. I am evaluated for my research. I have changed my FTEs. I did it unilaterally, and then my director said, okay, that's fine. But I was just like, you got to give me a break. But I do think it's important to my colleagues that I stay researching. And I think it's important to me to understand to keep a deep understanding of what my colleagues are doing, that I continue to keep producing at some level. So.
I was just nodding in agreement.
Many of us are. Here's one more thought from kind of our panel, and then I'd like to open the floor for questions from all of you if you have them. How did you know that you wanted to do this? How and when did you decide that administration was a good fit for you personally?
Can I just say that happened to me about 2 weeks ago? No, seriously.
Not reassuring, Matthew.
I literally had a moment a couple weeks ago where some great things had happened, and then the fan got hit, and there's some tough things that are happening. And I probably should have had this conversation with myself a little bit earlier. And I tried to decide whether I thought I could trust myself to be creative and empathetic in a tough situation in the way that I really needed to do that. And if so, would I be happier being the one helping to lead our way through something tough, or whether really I should be, put my head down and let somebody else take care of it. And I decided I would go ahead and trust myself, but it was relatively recent.
It sort of sounds like we've all had the similar experience. Maybe Ryan can chime in, that somebody came up to us and said, you would be good at this. And like I said, it was the senior females in our faculty that sort of pushed me into it. They're still probably my biggest supporters. And sometimes I think it's a backhanded compliment, and sometimes I think it's a good compliment. But it was other faculty who said, you would be really good at this and you should do this. And honestly, it was my piano teacher in university that said, you should be a theorist. You're really good at this. So I think other people might be better at seeing what you're good at sometimes than you are. That I could do it was at the end of my year. I was faculty senate chair when I had dealt with just about every constituency possible and seen us through some some really rough and tumble times that still haven't stopped, that I realized that I could, as an introvert, actually deal with people from the lowest staff member who was worried that they're going to get their job cut to the regent who wanted to fire half of us, and that I could do this, and that I had the skills to do it. And I also realized that I had a strong, I guess I always thought and hoped I had a strong moral line in the sand, but I was forced to hold that line many times that year. And it's really important to me that I continually advocate for and make change. This is what I found out, that to me, what's more important is making change for marginalized communities than it is for me to produce my next book. And so that is where I would rather have, I mean, I wrote a book, I really like it. I like what I did. I like what I had to say in there, and that doing another book like that would be great. But we are facing some significant challenges in higher education. The decline in enrollment is going to radically change all of our lives, I think. Oklahoma at the moment is growing only because the only state in the union that has a growing high school population is Texas. And so we have a bit of a Texas spigot, but the problem is Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, everybody else is going for the Texas spigot. The other thing is, pardon? Ohio, yeah. I mean, Arkansas and Missouri no longer charge out-of-state tuition to Texas students. That's where we're at. The other thing is there's going to be a radical change in the makeup of the cultural makeup of our country. And the University of Oklahoma is not prepared for that. That's all there is to it. And it's a historically white institution. Look, the state educational system was predicated on exclusivity, which is racism and misogyny. And we're going to have to change that radically. The population of the state of Oklahoma under 3 is majority minority. And we need to educate that group of people in 15 years. And that means the institution has got to change the way it works. And I would rather change it now than fail a generation while we figure out the change. So, I mean, we've failed generations for 200 years now. Let's stop now. Whoa, I got on a soapbox there, sorry.
So yes, I was also promoted by colleagues who mentioned to me that they could see me going into administrative roles, and I think that's just for all of us, whether we go into academic administration or not, or whether we're staying in a faculty position, just navigating tenure and then promotion. It's important to have relationships with colleagues that we trust, and to listen to their feedback, and it can often be very helpful, and certainly it was to me in taking on administrative work. I think that what Matthew kind of quippingly said about finding out 2 weeks ago is also true, that the longer one does it and the more one feels one is accomplishing things and having an impact, the more one feels it's a good path. So it is something that I think all of us have doubts when we start out in something new, and then through a combination of things and experiences, then we come to find that we're on the right path.
You should shut me up soon. I'm going to say, if you go into administration, you're going to mess up. That's all there is to it. And yeah, you need to, so you'll get really good at licking your wounds quickly, but also get really good at apologizing and just being very clear, this is how I messed up. And in general, that will, if you go and apologize to somebody in person, if you messed up in public, apologize in public, and make sure everybody who saw that you mess up sees you apologize. You will learn, and everybody will trust you more.
I ran a choir of adults and children together at a church for many years. And one of the rules we had is when you messed something up, you just raise your hand. And the adults would never raise their hands, and the kids would raise their hands all the time. And so I had to have a separate meeting with the adults. I said, look, I'm going to raise my hand when I mess up as the director, but that means that I need you to kind of get on board, because otherwise the kids start to learn that owning up to your mistakes is a bad idea, right? Whoa. And I said, if you raise your hand, I don't have to stop, and we can just keep going because I know you know what you did. It's a lot easier that way. So really just building an environment and modeling vulnerable behavior has been such a win. And it is really the only way I can personally feel like I'm allowed to make the mistakes and take the risks that we have to do in order to be able to move forward in such a rapidly changing environment.
Just a quick addition to that. I think one of the things that I feel we have such an impact on is just the culture within our own programs, and how the way that ideas are discussed and debated, and the way that viewpoints are considered, and this kind of spirit of openness and willing to talk about situations that could have been dealt with better, and how to do things differently in the future. That as administrators we have the ability to shape that whole discussion, and I think that's certainly something where I feel that I have a positive impact. And I think both of you have spoken about similar experiences.
And this might fall in the category of skills that we have as music theorists that adapt well to administration, right? That I know that apologizing is an important pedagogical technique in my own classroom. I'd wonder if there are questions from the floor. If you have questions, please come on up. We're going to insist that you use the microphone, but please don't be shy about it. Come on up.
Thank you. This is a great conversation. I'm really enjoying it. To build on a couple of things, one, I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on sort of the differences between falling into this position, which seems to happen most often. You get a phone call, you get promoted by your colleagues, versus your 20-year-old actively seeking the position. I think the strategies for those two situations are different. And then the other thing I'm curious about is you've reflected. I get the sense you're generally all happy. When aren't you happy in your positions?
I'm going to stick to going first. So I think the falling into and choosing, I think the path is probably the same. We just didn't realize we were following that path. And that path is being a good colleague, being a good committee member. I see colleagues, and I don't mean, well, it is going to come off a little negatively, that see their role as on a committee as what I call the warm body role, the quorum role. They're there to make the quorum. So, but I can't get them to second a motion. I can't get them, issues like this, and nobody wants them to be running something. So really, doing your job and doing it well, and being a good teacher, more than just how good your lecture is, but a mentor, a good sponsor, and being a good colleague on service is what you need to do, whether you are not thinking about it or whether you are thinking about it. So I would answer it that way. Was there a second question?
Just about formal applications for some sorts of procedures. Any comments on when academic administration positions are posted for formal?
Sure.
Any of us want to speak?
Right.
I'm gonna let you speak that.
Right. Well, I don't know if either of you have been through like an airport interview process, and
I've been on a decannal search
right,
committee.
we've been on search committee, so I thought maybe that might be. Sorry, I thought that might be a useful conversation. So what would I do if I were seeking a position, and that's actually happened to me, where I thought, okay, this might be interesting. You obviously things get listed. The higher the position is, the less likely that an application just to the position is actually going to be considered serious. So For me, it's all been about mentorship. I have great, great, great mentors. I've never been shy about seeking mentors and asking for mentorship. Even in my current job, I'm constantly reaching out to our vice presidents and our the other deans about questions when I'm thinking about how to do something. I have friends in several other institutions who are presidents and vice presidents just because I started asking questions a long time ago. And that's a great, great, great network. I'm happy to be part of your network if that's helpful. But the real process, the real live process for a more senior position like a deanship is that somebody nominates you. And you can actually ask somebody to nominate you. That's a little known secret. But if you get nominated, then a search firm will reach out to you, and then you get to have a conversation. And they say, hey, we'd like to talk to you a little bit about the position. Turns out that's an interview. I just didn't know it when I started. And I thankfully met a woman at a search firm when I was completely naive, who was then a mentor. And I asked her, I said, hey, would you be willing to mentor me through this? I've never done this before. So I went out to my first airport interview, which of course is the sort of super secret interviews where you can't cross paths with anybody else, and you wander in and there's a committee of 40 people and you have to say something brilliant to them in a 15-minute period, and then you get back on an airplane and leave. I was not very good at that one. I learned everybody on the committee, everything they had done. I had memorized everything about every one of them, and then it turned out to be creepy because in everything I said, I related to something somebody else did. It turns out that's great for development work, but not so great for airport interviews. But she came out, she was like, yeah, you're not going to get the job, but that was awesome. That was a great start. Let's have another conversation. And that person has been on my mentorship lists many, many times. She's never placed me in a job. She reaches out to me way too often with another job, and I don't want another job. So, but she's so terrific. So that kind of mentorship is important. So just thinking about how do you articulate your story and all those things that you didn't think led you to a life in administration, kind of managing, curating that list and how you tell your own story and how that connects to your mission, and how, anybody would hire these two people in a heartbeat because they're so articulate and thoughtful. They've accomplished so much and their mission is really clear. So watch out, world. It's really exciting.
Careful.
Yeah. But so many people that we interview don't do this. So just do what they do, ignore me altogether. But that's really important. And then, of course, there's, the campus interview, and then you go public, and the bigger the job is, the more public it is. So things like, I wouldn't have known that before you go to a campus interview, you have to tell your boss. Like, you have to. But I didn't know that. I went for a provost interview, and this was in the state newspaper. I don't know. I wasn't ready for that position at the time, so it seems silly in retrospect. But the president of the university came into my office and said, "What's going on? How come you didn't tell me about this?" And I thought, "Oh shoot, I should have asked my mentor network. That was a mistake." So made lots and lots of mistakes, but. That process is pretty exciting and very, very public. So if you have anything in your closet, probably you should keep your tenure line, really. But it's so public. People are digging everything up on you and connecting to all the people you've ever known anywhere. And there's no privacy in the process once you get past the airport interview, and even then that tends to get a little bit leaky. So that process is pretty extraordinary, but the starting place really is that somebody else nominates you. That's a secret. If I hadn't had a mentor, I would have never known. So either you ask them or they just nominate you, which also happens. And then the search firm contacts you, and then that first call is an actual interview. You got to be already thinking about, because and that call could happen an hour from now. They'll be like, "Hey, can I call you in an hour?" And you're like, "Crap," right? And if you're even mildly interested in the position, then you have to be ready to be in love with the institution in 45 minutes. There's just no way around it. I will say the other piece of that is that it's useful to take those calls even if you're not interested in the position, because you're developing a relationship with a search firm. And that matters, right? It matters for all kinds of things. When you are looking to hire a search firm, I mean, we just went through this at the university. I have a relationship with a couple search firms. We hired them, so they're people I already know. I've worked with them before. But also, they're kind of keeping an eye out for you, and they kind of know who you are and what you're interested in, and if that right position comes up. So as you move through the echelons, that's important. But again, the other thing is, I think what Sarah said is really curating a list of all the things that you are doing now that you don't think are leading you necessarily to a particular kind of job, but really thinking about, okay, this skill and this is the thing, these are the things I'm doing to cultivate that skill, and kind of organizing your sort of ghost CV, if you will, in that way would be what I would be doing. If I were in a position to be thinking about the next step.
I'm really lucky in that my brother is he has his PhD in public policy administration and specializes in education. And then my father was a CEO for an R&D company that did proton. I've now forgotten. I don't know. He was a nuclear physicist. But what it is I have somebody that understands the educational system on a broad sense outside of the university, and I have somebody who was a manager and he came into that position with a PhD in nuclear physics, not as a business person or anything like that, and so had to develop his own skills. And so I get really good advice from them. My father is always like, "Why do you listen to me? I did nuclear physics," but that's actually figuring out how he got to where he was, because he came from small town, dirt poor Arkansas, and retired as CEO, and he had to learn a lot along the ways. And so I listened to him constantly, and then figure out how I can translate that to the world of academia and the world of the School of Music. People say that constantly are saying, "Oh, what you guys get away with in the academy, you'd never get away with in business." Oh, that's so not true. It's all there's a lot of similarities. I think the difference is that in business you can get fired quicker, but he serves at the pleasure. He could get fired tomorrow. That's all there is to it. And so once you get into administration, it is very similar.
Actually, no joke at all. I've been a little more aggressive than even normal, and I'm pretty aggressive in general. Not mean aggressive, but like really pushy when it comes to things that I feel when we're making a decision as a university, I feel won't serve the university well. I feel like it's just my job to really try to do the best I can to articulate a different possibility, because I just know I'm more creative than a lot of people, and I wanna workshop things. So I've been scheduling a lot of lunches with people in our institution who I don't get to push around, but I get to suggest a lot of things. And I got a phone call from the president last week, and I thought, oh, that's it. I did it. I pushed too hard. And in fact, he wasn't mad at me at all. He really wanted me to share all these great things that I've been sharing with everybody else, with all the other deans, which is kind of cool. But you never know, right? Any moment I'm going to get that phone call, especially now that we're live broadcast. And it's going to, it's true. The great thing about being an administrator in our positions is I loved the thing that I did before I became an administrator. And like every day when I'm starting to panic, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job if I push this too hard, I think, oh no, I get to do the right thing, because if I do the right thing and somebody fires me, I don't get fired. I get to do the thing I loved before I did this. Like, how awesome is that? Right, that's the one reason I say to my daughter, you might like being a dean, but that's about it.
thank you all so much for being here and sharing your stories with us about how you got in to these roles. One skill that I think you guys all hinted at, but maybe didn't articulate specifically, is compromise and being able to, come to a consensus about really, heated issues and coming up with a solution that may not be what you had initially envisioned, but is going to be successful. And in my own limited experience in academic leadership, also having to deal with general ed things. So I got the phone call to be put in charge of a university committee in the year that we are going to change the core curriculum at the university for the first time in 15 years. So you say yes, and you do it, and it turned out it worked, and it was to add a diversity component to the core curriculum. And luckily, I'm not on the committee that's actually doing the implementation of it. We just got to do the big picture, agree to that this needs to happen role. And actually missed the meeting yesterday where they were going to present their findings. So I'll have to go back and see. But my question is about the higher up you go into administration, the more you start having to deal with entities that control the university, but yet aren't necessarily academics in their background. And I'm meaning like trustees and regents. And I have found it difficult to make a convincing argument to said boards for things that I feel are important to the university. And so I wonder if you guys have any strategies for dealing with that constituency that isn't academic.
It's a great question. Really, to be honest to God, the number one thing I do is translate from artist to administrator to non-university personnel. That translation process, again, here we go back to the Soviet Union, right? It's constant translation. Like, how do I capture the work of our incredible artistic faculty? I mean, just the work is extraordinary. A ceramics exhibition that is breathtaking to me. And how do I translate that to a board of trustee members who's an energy magnate who loves the university but is impatient about the pace of change and why things are happening the way they are? I don't know what happened. It's probably my dad. I just have a business brain. So I'm an entrepreneur. I speak number really fluently. A lot of you have this in the back of your mind. And it turns out that it is just a skill that I happen to have. And again, I think it's music theory, it's my dad, it's accounting, it's all the things that just happen naturally. But being able to figure out a way to display that in numbers and display that in value and show what happens to value when you do that. So here's a conversation I had last week, just to give you kind of a sense. So I know that my college has roughly 4.2% of the population of the university, and we're on track. We're the only college at the university that's growing. That gives me a louder voice than everybody else. Even though I only have 4.2% of the population, we're going to be maybe 5.1% in 5 years, which is pretty exciting because we're doing really cool stuff. My faculty are extraordinary in their ability to manage change and nimbleness in an environment that just doesn't support it, right? But still, 5.1%, which means I should have 1/20th of the say in any decision, right? Our budget is roughly 6% of the budget of the university. And so while we're growing, we're also shrinking our budget, which my faculty are like, what's happening? We're growing. We're doing everything you said. Why is our budget shrinking? And I said, well, because the rest of the university can't support that difference between 4.2% and 6%, right? The budget and the number of students have to come closer to matching. They'll never match. We're the College of Fine Arts. We're not going to solve the university's budget problem. But I said, if you keep doing what you are doing, I keep getting a 50% or a 30% vote in everything that's happening because we are unique. And because I can say those things in a number story, like that was just a story, right? that was just like a story about like what I did last week and go fishing, but I use numbers in it, and those are numbers that you can actually look up if you really want. That changed this particular board of trustee member's mind. It changes the president's mind. It's an effective strategy that music theorists know all about. We tell number stories about something that is ineffable and heart-wrenching all the time. So yeah, number stories are good.
I think one of the things that we've talked about before is again, this translation exercise and the impact of music. And sometimes in the past, I think we've tended to argue the argument on a fairly limited basis, which is to say, what's the impact of music theory on music performance, or what's the impact of music theory on music education? And I think especially now in the 21st century, the impacts are really so broad, and even if our own faculty are not pursuing research or outreach projects in particular areas, we can still talk about how music education and can lead to other sorts of very direct impacts, whether it's in terms of music therapy or research that's going on in terms of applications to music in prison populations, sort of public music theory work that's ongoing, the impact intersections between music and technology. I know in our own institution there's an enormous interest in music applications within our engineering program, and we always have engineering students coming to us wanting to get an introduction to music theory, to learn about how that they can better produce music apps that they want to design to monetize something on the internet, and there are these new types of intersections that involve music and something else, and the way in which we can speak to the new interdisciplinaries that are beyond music and the humanities, I think are ones that can be really useful in talking to populations, whether they're donors or boards of regents and so on.
I just have to add to that because it's so critical. That's the other thing is building as many partnerships as you can. Part of our strategic plan when I came to Ohio University was to make sure that we had some kind of official outline partnership with every other college on campus. It was a bit of an insidious plot, but actually is really good for students, right, to have that connection. One of the students here caused me to start building a relationship with one other college around something that's really important to her. And I'm so thankful that you happen to be standing outside in the hallway of my office to have that conversation. So anyway, it's so important to have those partnerships because of the interdisciplinary work we do, but also then all of a sudden you become very important to the institution when everybody sees the fine arts as a lens by which we can do anything at the university. This is something I say to the president all the time, and now he says it, which is really exciting, but it has to happen in practice, right? And we're not experts at it, but we have to build that those opportunities there at conferences. Just keep learning, but build those interdisciplinary possibilities. What you're doing at University of Toronto is awesome, by the way. Just check it out. The music and neurology. I mean, it's really stunning. So. There's so many opportunities out there, and we already knew that music was important. It seems really obvious to us, but it's not obvious to everybody else. The good news, it is so important that we have lots of opportunities to make sure everybody else knows.
Jack Boss from the University of Oregon. My question has to do with the promotion and tenure piece of what you do as either department chairs or as deans. And a little bit of background. I've served now a couple of times in the last few years as a committee chair, personnel committee chair for the School of Music and Dance in Oregon, and then once as the committee chair for the university, promotion and tenure committee. And so it's been a struggle for me and the deans that I've served with. For example, to teach a clarinetist what it means to be, or to exceed expectations for a digital composer. And to teach a digital composer, well, what does it mean to exceed expectations for a clarinetist in research or teaching or service? And then to try to communicate that same message to people outside the school, to university personnel committee to provost, et cetera. So I'm curious, what are your strategies for doing that, for sort of navigating that whole? We have so many different specialties in schools of music and dance. How do you sort of teach, one about the other in the promotion and tenure category?
I'm going to give a slight off-center answer to that and then let these guys take it. One thing I have worked really hard when trying to promote the School of Music and the College of Fine Arts to the greater university is to find out from all the other genres of faculty what their pressure points are. So what gives the geochemists the biggest anxiety attacks? What gives the accounting professor the biggest anxiety attacks? And then try to figure out how to translate their anxiety attacks to our clarinet professor's anxiety attacks. Like, this is where this person's pressure points are in their job. We recruit so much more than most any other university, and so translating that recruiting issue, and good or bad, the football band helps that translation a bit because they get to see the numbers that way. So I have really worked hard to understand other people's jobs so that I can then, so I can better represent them as a fellow faculty member, but also so that I can do a better job of translating our jobs. Because unless you can make it real to them how this is a pressure point, they're not going to understand it.
A part of my hesitancy, and I think tenure and promotion is something that there's such a different approach to it at every institution, and it's something that has very specific guidelines and policy at every institution. And one of the questions that I would have is whether your institution has policies that apply at specific departmental levels. In our institution, there is general language in the agreement that governs faculty contracts that pertains to all professors at the university, but each division is also required to have specific guidelines. So there is there are specific criteria for tenure in music and for excellence in teaching in music. Like, we have specific faculty level guidelines, and I think that doesn't exist at some schools, and I think in those scenarios it probably makes it more challenging to articulate what exactly is the language at our institution is the distinction between competence and excellence being the standard that's required for tenure and promotion. I think something which is helpful in our institution is we have a very open assessment process at the end of each year, in which that faculty activity reports are not just reviewed by the dean and the administration, but they are in fact reviewed by a faculty committee, so that really builds a sense over time. People get to see what other colleagues are doing throughout the year, and that every faculty member might serve on that committee about once every 9 or 10 years, since we do it on a straight rotation, so everyone goes through the committee. And that really helps to get a sense even beyond serving on tenure and promotion committees. I think mentorship is important in the sense that if new faculty are assigned mentors, and they're assigned mentors in appropriate ways, presumably the dean or associate dean or some senior administrator has given some guidance to those mentors as to what constitutes an appropriate standard when it comes to tenure and promotion, and hopefully that's also conveyed through the mentorship process. And to my way of thinking, both in terms of tenure and promotion, not just tenure, but also promotion, that kind of mentorship and ensuring that's happening is a really critical thing for administrators to do, and hopefully kind of forestall those issues that you're speaking about that might come up at the time. I guess the other question which I would just have about your your process is the role to which external assessments play. Because I certainly find that if external assessors are well chosen, that the comments that come in from external assessors are the most useful thing in having the discussion with other colleagues, and especially from colleagues from outside of music. That there's a certain weight and respect that external assessments bear that can be really useful to have, and to have a large number of those on hand is something I've certainly found useful.
It's just amazing how somebody says who is basically just you at another institution carries 100 times more weight than the thing you said. So I'm going to say external letters are so important. I really, really hate messy tenure cases. I hate them. They're so terrible. They're terrible for everybody. They're terrible because they're terrible for the person going through them. They're terrible for the P&T committee. They're terrible for the dean. They're terrible for the provost and the president. Everybody suffers in a messy case. And it makes me really annoyed when we put up somebody after telling them for years that they weren't doing what they needed to be doing. I don't understand how that can possibly happen, but it does. And I'm trying to make sure that doesn't happen anymore, because it's just not good. It doesn't help anybody. And to go for and to be applying for another job having not gotten tenure is a tough position to be in. It's not really fair. It would be much fairer to a year earlier say, hey, you know what? I don't think this is going to happen. And I just need to look you in the eyes, and I'm going to write you a great letter about these things that you do that are terrific. I feel like that's the humane thing to do, and yet we kick the can down the road often. And so it's just rough. And I've been through cases where people have appealed successfully, and I've been able to be supportive of them, even in the face of a non-positive committee vote. But those people then aren't happy in their jobs because they're already undermined. It's such a difficult thing to negotiate. So somebody taught me something, gave me some advice when I was at Florida State. A person who was very senior member of the community said, look, we just don't put forward cases that we don't know are slam dunk. We just don't do it. Whether that's the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it, and everybody's standards are different, it's really important that we build trust with our colleagues by putting forward really good cases. And that means it's everybody's job to make sure that people are getting mentorship, people are being, there's never a case where I look at a group of faculty who haven't done their job mentoring and then they're like, well, he should have done this. And I'm like, no, we should have done this. This is our failing. When we did program evaluations in the provost office at Florida State, we looked at the number of denials of tenures. The committee for P&T for those departments would come in and they would say, look, we did a great job. We didn't award tenure to 3 people. It shows we have high standards. And I was like, no. It means you didn't do what you need to do to mentor young faculty into the thing that you want for this university and to connect them. I mean, the loss of dollars and power and time and it's just terrible. Anyway, so really don't like it. Did I say that? So it really is, the mentorship is so important in connecting people to mentors and then building that trust and then making sure the outside letters are absolutely exactly what you need so that you can have those conversations. I had a really interesting conversation at ICFAT a few weeks ago about impact metrics because, of course, university committees are moving more towards impact. So we have some challenges in music theory in showing what is the impact of our work. MTO shows readership in a really broad way, so that's helpful, but other journals don't necessarily have that kind of easy impact metric. But we were talking specifically about all the community work that we're trying to move towards as we're trying to be centerpieces in the arts of our community. How do we incentivize that? How do we build that into promotion and tenure? And how do you build some impact metrics around that? So it's a really interesting topic and really important. And I'm looking forward to future conversations about it. And I know there's a whole bunch of deans meeting together to try to imagine how would we bring that information to a committee of scientists and help them understand what the value is. So great question, Jack.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Alvarez. I'm from Atlanta. I'm a bit of an anomaly here at the conference. I'm a performer first in a quartet, but I did my master's in theory, so I like to join the nerds every once in a while. I was intrigued by the conversation of translation because the work that I do is both at the secondary level and higher education level. We do a lot of work doing different kinds of programming, and we have discovered with that the necessity of collaboration. And in terms of within and without institutions. And I'm wondering, from an administrative perspective, how much of that is occurring long-term? You know, we have STEM, we have STEAM, we have all these ideas of collaborating within university campuses and everything, but how much of that at your level, but also within your schools, at the faculty level even, the collaboration extending beyond departments, beyond schools, beyond the campus, into corporate, into globally, really, and how much your funding and time are your challenges always, and the minutia that you have to deal with on a daily basis. How much opportunity do you have for that? Is that something that is more a fine arts perspective or a university's perspective, and that sort of thing?
The moving beyond the institution border is, I think some schools have always done it well. All schools are going to have to do it well. This is and it's the right thing to do, but the drivers again are the student population decreasing, and especially for state institutions, the decrease in state support. And so the only way to continually recruit and continually bring in money is to be more engaged at every level with the community outside the borders of the institution. So again, I think some universities and some schools or colleges of music have been doing this better than others. It's certainly something that is being pushed very hard at my institution at all levels. And we just applied for the Carnegie designation for community engagement, and that's a provost level thing. But at the same time, at the School of Music level thing, we are working very hard to develop significant and stronger relationships within our city, but within the state at the community engagement level. It's an active learning, right? We now know this is the way the best way to prepare students, but also it becomes a recruitment tool. It becomes a fundraising tool. It's the right thing to do for many reasons.
Career training.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, the reason I moved to my current job is because there was a set of value statements. I don't know who made them happen, but I liked them. And the number one value statement was, we believe the arts have the power to transform society and individual lives. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't say it at least 3 or 4 times, because it keeps me on track, right? So, and if we're not actively doing that in every choice that we make, then I feel like we're kind of missing out on our primary value statement. So I came in, I started a Center for Collaborative Arts. It's pretty extraordinary. We've built 101, exactly 101. I like that number, so that works. I can't have 102nd, it'll ruin the number. Community partners across the region and the state. We'll, in 2.5 years of my being dean there, we will have 11 new degree programs by the end of the year, all of which have some collaborative element to it or cross-disciplinary in some ways. I've got 4 or 5 more sort of on the way. We're really just retooling. We're embracing who we are. And our ability to do that helps because if we had a really, really narrowly construed conservatory environment, it would be a lot harder. But because we sort of live in a convenient position where there are other places where you can have the focused conservatory education. You can get a great conservatory style education, but most of our students aren't choosing that. They're choosing something different. And so that's what a great opportunity I see. So we have a big partnership with the College of Medicine. We have the largest college of osteopathic medicine, one of the largest in the country. It's super exciting. We're working with the Cleveland Clinic as a partnership for building an arts and medicine curriculum and an initiative. There is so much work to be done. I can't even articulate. I have enough plans to take me 15 years, and I'm sure there'll be another set of plans by that point, because the arts are so powerful, and we're just really scratching the surface. So anyway, thank you for what you're doing, by the way, because it sounds like what you're doing is really extraordinary. And this is what happens is somebody says, hey, I'm doing this cool thing. And I say, oh, let's do that. And if we can figure out a way to be creative about funding and finding partners and building it out, I just love it when people have an exciting partnership that meets these goals.
I think the only thing I would add as well is thinking again about how our undergraduate students are having experiential learning activities embedded in their courses. And that's certainly something in music programs. We've always had experiential learning just by the nature of performance and ensemble playing, but making it more formalized, which is to say, what are the different sorts of education activities that are occurring beyond the usual ones, and not supplanting, but in addition to the usual ones of student teachers going into the classroom as teachers assistants to observe and to help out, but what other sorts of community music learning are they engaged in? Are students going out and performing in retirement homes or palliative care settings? And how do those function in the curriculum? I mean, is that part of say, either a master class or chamber music course in which there's a required outreach activity? And then in our scheme of doing these, we require a written reflection on the outreach activity, so that there is both the musical experience of going out there, but there's a way of thinking about how it's done, how it's presented, what its impact is, and articulating that. And that's something which we've been working on the past couple of years, is making those a little bit more formalized and identifying them and making sure that they're required in many courses, both to give the students the educational outcome, but also for us on a program basis to be able to articulate to other members in the senior administration and in the community exactly how our music students are having this impact in the community and engaging with it.
I'm going to add one more thing to this. Again, this experiential learning is a no-lose situation. And one of the, I went and found the report, I found multiple reports that I took to my provost about this, is that, again, I hate to come back to that, but we have to be pragmatic, and money is a big issue right now. And that's, the drop in population is a money issue. And so all universities have to be focusing more on their retention rate, especially their first year retention rate. And these experiential learning situations are huge drivers for retention. And not only do students who have them tend to stay in school and finish school, students from marginalized communities benefit twice as much from these. It creates a sense of belonging. It creates a sense of mission. And so, back to, we should be doing it because we are the arts and that's what we do. But there's so many other benefits to it. And I strongly believe that we in the arts have got to be less conservative. We've got to branch out. we've got to build a culture of inclusivity and belonging to everyone, and not just people who want to do dramatic white male music. Right.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mike Callahan. I teach at Michigan State. I appreciate the honesty and vulnerability all three of you have shared. I wanted to pick up on the thread of work-life balance that Stan raised
Is that a thread?
earlier.
Because I don't remember that part.
So a little bit of personal story. I've been contemplating for some years whether I would like to go into administration, and I've become only more deeply ambivalent about it. Not because I don't think I could do it well or because I don't think it would be rewarding, but because I have not seen in my sort of local set of role models an example of someone who has seemed to master this aspect of it. Two of the people who are close to me, both of them are friends in administrative positions. One is extremely prompt and responsive, and I think has very poor work-life balance, and another has drawn a hard line and is much less prompt and much less responsive. You can imagine which one of these people I prefer to work with, but actually I respect both equally, and I see both as equally problematic, and I see in each of them precisely half of what I would insist upon if I ever were to go down this path. So what I'm wondering is, are there sort of basic individual things that you do, calendar management, Pomodoro technique, email management, to try to bridge this gap and make both possible? Are there things you can negotiate for in taking on an administrative position that allows you to achieve a balance? I'm just wondering, is this reconcilable?
Michael, these are great questions. I think one of the things that I hope you're hearing is that we all like our jobs, even though it is hard to maintain that balance, that there's the impact that we get to make is such a privilege, and while we get to do that, that's pretty exciting. And if you think about your life in stages, right, this isn't the whole thing that I'm going to ever do in my life. There's going to be some other set of things will either be worse in the balance scale or better in the balance scale. And if you think about life balance as a lifetime process, maybe that's an easier swallow, right? If you know what I mean. Things that are very, very important. So I have 6 school directors that work for me, and they are extraordinary people. And investing in them is so important. And we talk a lot about work-life balance in our, well, we don't talk a lot about it, but a couple times a year we talk about, okay, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Because I'm asking them so much, and because I'm impatient, we're pushing hard all the time. But one of the things we've talked about is I'm requiring each of them to take a month off. And I promise I won't contact them during that time. I lied. I do contact them during that time, but because I feel so bad about it, it's very small. It'll be brief. It usually is a couple days. I worked in sabbaticals for my directors, so over a certain period of time. No, I mean, it's because it's crazy what I'm asking them to accomplish. It's a huge amount of work. And so I have to be really aware that they're human beings at the same time as I say, unfortunately, the times require these things, and you are the people to do it. So I would ask for those things if somebody doesn't just offer them to you. A morning at home is so glorious. I can't remember the last time I took one, but my staff, when they start to look a little, wide-eyed, I'll say, hey, why don't you work from home tomorrow? Because maybe you'll feel a little bit better if you get caught up, and that does wonders. But again, if you kind of negotiated it in, hey, I'd like to have, one morning a week where I'm not in the office and I'm just getting through the backlog so that I don't feel quite so bad about it. Those kinds of things would be helpful. I wish I had better triage for my email, because it does mean that I fall on the less responsive side on the email, because it's just more than anybody. If my whole job was just to respond to email, I still wouldn't have enough hours in the day. But there are other ways to get a hold of me, and a phone call is fast, and a text message is even faster. So there are other ways to balance, and obviously calendaring very thoughtfully, even your free times, and as I mentioned earlier, over calendaring those times when you know you need to catch up, because there's going to be some fire. Those do help maintain some degree of sanity.
I live and die by my calendar, and every morning I get up and check to see what I have to do that day. And the whole integrated calendar thing is important, and you do have to literally block that time off for yourself, or else.
Right, lunch block.
Yeah.
Hold.
Or,
do not add.
Yeah. Or it's just not going to work. Look, I have never done anything the way you're supposed to. My life has never gone according to plan. About the time that I was the age where and people become administrators and their kids are in high school or college, I took on a new kid, right? I took in a foster child this year. The first 5 weeks of the semester, I had a second child. Insane, truly insane. It was crazy. He was wonderful. He was so worth it. And so I think that is, again, I'm going to go back to where I draw the line and my balance. And I make there is something more important than my job in my life. And that person is, or that second, how many people that is. And it was actually my son that said, he told me last week, can we foster again? I was like, okay, we're going to do that. So I think it's really critical to have a broader sense and not have your work be your life. I also write it into my syllabi that I will respond between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays. And if you email me on Friday at 6, you're not getting a response until Monday. And I hold true to that with my colleagues for the most part, too. I don't answer the phone if you call me on Sunday. If my director did, I might. But I will say I have an awesome director who has always prioritized his children and still does. In fact, I picked up a lot of slack this semester for him because he has a child who's been sick and they've been traveling to Houston to deal with it. And so if I know that I can, again, my research has gone to glacial place, and I don't know. And last year I actually pulled out of 2 conferences, and I did them both sort of at the last minute, and I did them because of my son. One of them, I just walked up to my director and said, I'm not going. It's his birthday. I'm not going to miss it. Stan knows I've lost it on Facebook about SMT scheduling over Halloween. I won't come. I'm not going to come. And I remember him going, he stopped and he's like, this isn't good, Sarah. And then he paused and he said, but you'll never get that time back. So I have a director like that. And that's who you want to work for. So that's another thing. Make sure your boss is somebody you want to work with. I turned down an associate provost that I was asked to apply, and I was like, I don't want to work for him. Now, I have a former grad student here who can come tell you how much I dropped the balls on my grad students, even though that was not, I try not to, but I know, I distinctly, I think that was the year I was faculty senate president, and your last year, and she was my GA, and it was just a dumpster fire.
We had a phrase, and I can't remember it now, but we probably can't say it. So.
Probably not.
Great question, and again, I don't have any solutions beyond what has been one is what's been suggested. But I think that the important thing is that you recognize that it's an issue and it's something that you want to think through. And again, I just reinforce talking about it openly with if you are considering something with the person that you would be reporting to, and see what can be arranged in terms of schedule and supports.
Just another thought. So I happen to be married to our development officer, and that turns out to be both super convenient because it means that when we are crazy going on a trip and doing 16 meetings in 2.5 days, I'm also with my spouse, which actually turns out to be really great sometimes. And again, I hope she's not watching. Sometimes it's not so great because we're both like, wah! It creates a childcare challenge that I didn't really imagine, but some people don't have. But actually, that means that our trips are short. They're really intense and they're frequent, but they are very, very brief because we have to find childcare when we're traveling. And actually, that's good for us from a family perspective. So there are ways to do it, I guess, is my point.
Okay, I'm slightly dreading what she's going to ask.
No, actually, I have a question that is mainly aimed towards you. But it's what's really fun though is that I want to say Sarah, but I first met her as a freshman and she was Dr. Reichart. So this is very weird. Okay, but my question is on the sort of side of self-care and navigating academia, in particular as someone who is perhaps less privileged. And my question is, I know that teaching in general is often a thankless job. Administrative duties are often thankless and despised. And so I just wonder how you manage to sort of continually collect yourself. And it's more than just, the thick skin or support from people. If there's not support there, what it is that you would do to kind of recenter and reground and have faith in yourself and what you're doing is right. And then the sort of follow-up to that is, if you could maybe suggest to allies, to male colleagues especially, things they could do in faculty meetings, things they could do in the administrative circles to sort of help navigate that sphere. Maybe it's only my personal sort of experience, but I think others have shared it, that a lot of these administrative tasks seem to be something we're just expected to do anyway, and not really something that is valued as extra to our job, extra to our duty. Things like you mentioned going to people's offices, taking up the slack for others, things like that I think we have sort of been ingrained to do, and aren't necessarily always recognized as doing a good job, but rather just being a good person. And I just want to know if you can comment on that and how to navigate that.
Okay, the studies, everything show that women bear the brunt of the emotional support network, and people of color double down on that, especially if you're a female person of color, because if you're at a predominantly white institution and have very few faculty of color, they're the mentor to every person of color, and then also some of the women. And so to answer one of your questions, as a white male academic, understanding the serious amount of work that goes into just mentor and support, and try not to lose these students, because it's a constant, I think, with at a predominantly white institution, that marginalized communities do not feel like they belong. They do not feel like they are included, and it is our role to support them, to include them, make them feel belonged. It is our moral role to increase the education, the numbers of people that are educated from marginalized communities. So as a male colleague, I honestly think there's a lot of male colleagues who don't get how much you do. And there's not so much you can do, but you can also grow your network of other people that will include some amazing male colleagues. I'm going to just point out to you that Michael Lee totally gets it. And he's always there for me. And if I need to go vent, I can go vent to him and he will totally get it. And sometimes that's all I need. I just needed to go vent. But sometimes I'll say, I need you to go do this. And he will. I can count on him. So it's sort of just in a way the way it is. I would like us to start putting into evaluation procedures, multicultural literacy and mentorship, because they like mentorship is evaluated as in graduating a master's student or a PhD student. It's not evaluated in supporting the undergrads or and multicultural literacy at the moment is that I'm pushing hard for this to become part of an evaluation criteria. Doesn't mean you have to, but it is something that you will be evaluated on, so that if you're doing it, you get credit for it, and that just needs to happen. Did I hit everything there?
How do you take care of yourself?
This is going to sound, it sounds cheesy, but I'm going to just say it. I practice nonviolence, and I practice nonviolence against myself constantly. And I now preach this to my students that, whoops, I just totally messed up. Okay, don't get down. And I've only gotten good at that I'm better at it in the last 3 years. I was the queen of imposter syndrome. I was the queen of anxiety attacks and not sleeping. And the world is miserable if you don't get enough sleep. And so it's been a long process. I'm going to tell you right now, I have a therapist I go to every other week where I just dump on her, and it's great. I'm just going to admit that so I fostered my son. You were part of that. I fostered my son. I fostered him for over 3 years. And so there was a good 2 of those years where it was not clear he was going to stay with me, which was incredibly anxiety inducing after you've been raising. He was 11 weeks when I got him. So I will also tell you, I was on anti-anxiety meds that whole time. There was no way I was going to get through that. The thought of losing your child is horrible. But that also helped me, man, I just can't get too upset about other things anymore, right? It's just the way it is. But nonviolence, practice it against yourself, practice against everybody you can encounter. I guess you guys want to add to that? I don't know.
Some people run at lower octane, and that I look at those people and admire them. I run at an incredibly high octane level, which means that when I really need to be very conscious about my efforts. I live in a super crunchy town, so I've been going to yoga. It's actually really terrific. I am the least flexible person in the whole world, and yet it has really been wonderful. Being a major in psychology would have been helpful, but there's so much to read out there, and really learning about what parts of you get activated by what parts of other people, and knowing that and kind of planning for the hidden conversations is really, really, really important, because every conversation has the one that you're having with your mouth, and then of course your body, and then there's that secret conversation that's really going on, and being really, really aware of that and trying to maintain calmness while you're doing that. I mean, that's the healthy empathy part, right? You have to be empathetic to be good at your job, or at least I think so. Of course, you've got 3 really vulnerable people sitting up here who are willing to lay it all out, right? Right. I mean, that's incredible. It's not everybody who's like that. Like, there are people you will run into who want to prove they're the best. And I feel like those people often aren't doing what they need to be doing. Sarah, go ahead.
I'm going to tell you, everybody self-medicates. That's all there is to it. Everybody self-medicates some way or another. So find your self-medication that is a positive one and not a negative one. Yoga is great. Running, exercising. I mean, you think you're exhausted, but going and working, and I have minimized mine are 30 minutes. I don't do more than 30 minutes. That's all I have time for. It's actually also all I have energy for. But that 30 minutes will clear out the negativity that is bringing you down better than anything other than a good 8 hours of sleep. That's the other thing. I have told people, and I probably told this to you, I don't get paid enough to be exhausted. And so I prioritize my sleep, and I'm lucky I have a child who he's not a morning person, so I can, if I need to sleep in, he will too. And so I'm very lucky on that point. But I just don't get paid enough to be, they could double my salary. I'm still going to get work towards getting 8 hours of sleep. I skipped a meeting this morning because I couldn't sleep last night. I was like, I'm not doing it. So.
I'm addicted to my Fitbit. I really, 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 hold myself to it, so I'll get home really late.
I stopped on mine.
Yeah. I wanted to say something about the challenge of privilege and diversity and inclusion, and thinking really differently about that. It is going to be a lifelong journey for many of us. I'm speaking from a particular position that I think is obvious. The amount I didn't understand and the amount I continue to go, oh my God, I can't believe it. I can't believe. I mean, it's really easy to start beating up on yourself, and you should not, according to the great book White Fragility, you should not feel empathetic towards me. That's my journey. That I have to take that on. But we, in my college, has been so critical. We've now done 3 college-wide workshops. We've started a diversity advocate program where the person of color on the committee, or the person from a different a minoritized group who's on the committee no longer is asked to serve the role of advocating for people who are in minoritized positions. We now have another person who gets training, who gets bystander intervention training. It was a pilot for the university, and it was awesome. It was so successful. I can't even say how wonderful the results have been, because we're hiring different kinds of people. We're having different kinds of conversation. I'm so excited. There's so much work left to do, but it is great. And the people who lived in that, I'm always going to only be able to advocate for the minoritized people role. Those people are like, oh my God, I'm so much less exhausted all the time. So that's been really great. But it's really through just constant vigilance and training. We brought Actors Equity out last year. It was very expensive, but it was a full day training, and everybody left in tears. It was exactly what I needed, what everybody needed to kind of think differently. Has it solved the problem? No, there's so much work to do. We did a shared read, White Fragility in particular. It's not an easy shared read. This was not a comfortable position for a lot of people, but we just have to keep at it, because there's so much work to do, and there is no point at which we're like, okay, we did it, check. Just never, ever, ever going to happen. The work on first generation college students and the gaps is so extraordinary. Really being vulnerable is so critical. Saying, I struggled with this, allows a student to feel like it's okay for them to struggle with it. Wow. There's a lifetime of work to do, and then there'll be another lifetime of work to do. But we just have to keep on it. I'm sorry, Ryan. I know you get to say something.
It's great. Sarah and Matthew are both so eloquent, and I can say I agree with everything. So yeah, I mean, self-care is always a challenge, and I mean, for me, it's always been running, and I'm sometimes less committed to it, but I always get back on the level of commitment at some point. I think another thing is again goes back to the kind of culture that we create in our spaces. So something that we've been thinking a lot the last couple of years is around mental health with our students, because we've seen kind of a rising number of issues around mental health, and so we're getting much more in the habit of having workshops on site in our building for students and different types of events, and I think having a culture where mental health broadly is acknowledged and discussed is also a way in which that it helps faculty and staff to talk about things, and just being open about things we're feeling and discussing them, acknowledging them. That's such a critical part in terms of managing the stresses in our lives and what we're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I strongly recommend everybody read White Fragility.
Yeah, it's a must read.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion so far. I've been exploring these shark-infested waters of administration as an associate dean for a few months now, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about a different type of balance. You've talked a lot about the faculty advocacy role, faculty leadership. Could you talk a little bit more about then how you also have to represent institutional perspective, alignment with strategic goals, mission fulfillment to faculty, since it's kind of goes both directions?
It's another translation exercise.
Yeah. Heath Brothers have a great book. It's called Switch, I think. Has anybody read that? It's really an easy read, but brilliant on how do you deal with change management. It was my brother-in-law who said he had just finished business school, and I said, I've always wondered what an MBA would be like. I said, what did you learn? He said, I didn't learn anything, but I did learn to read this book, and you should read it. So that's a really thoughtful book about how do you take a message from one level or a different level and translate it and motivate and create. There's different ways, there's different strategies to helping everybody kind of get on the same page. And everybody has a different set of strategies that will work with them from their personality. But that book was really, really instrumental.
It seems to me there's a couple of things. One is just the reminding. I mean, sometimes faculty members can forget how reliant we are on the highest levels of the administration for the very operation of our programs, and sometimes I think that needs to be explicitly stated and reminded. And then just explaining that the more we're part of a process, it's better. That it's all making faculty members feel like, here's an invitation, your voice, your consultation, here's a consultation, your input is being welcomed on this. Isn't it great that we have a chance to have our voices heard and to discuss this, as opposed to presenting it as some sort of requirement or demand, or that we fit within some preordained scheme of things from above, here's a way of articulating, our vision of ourselves and how it fits with the visions of other units within the institution. So I think it is really a translation exercise in terms of language and presenting. In terms, hopefully rolling, if it's something like creating a strategic plan for our unit, which aligns with a larger strategic plan, presenting it in enough time so there can be discussion and perhaps small working groups to talk about certain aspects, to draft certain components of it. So I think it's both a translation exercise and presenting it as an opportunity for discussion and feedback. But I do feel that there's also the need to remind faculty about the very real situations with respect to resources and who pays their salary.
Also transparency. The more transparent you can be, the better. The University of Oklahoma has a horrible history of transparency, and what that causes is extreme paranoia, even at the lowest level. So the more transparent you can be in your working, the better.
Our institution had an RCM budget model, resource-centered model, which has lots of ups and downs. There's reasons to like it, reasons not to like it. But I will say that it made it very, very, very clear how every single dollar, and raspberry dollars and blueberry dollars and lemon dollars, because they're all different flavors and they can't be mixed, but how they come into the university and how they get distributed. And no matter how you feel about how they get distributed, knowing how every dollar flows means that every conversation can sort of articulate, here's what will happen if we do this, and here's what will happen if we do that. And I can sit and I don't even have to use the back of an envelope, but I say that from a back of the envelope calculation, this is what we would have to give up to do this thing. Now, not every conversation is a budget conversation. Lots of conversations are do the right thing conversations. And I would always rather do the right thing than fix the budget, but I have to fix the budget sometimes in order to do the right thing. And I think that conversation actually helps a lot with our faculty conversations. You know, it does incentivize us to think a little bit differently and about what matters. I mean, I counseled the president last week and said the budget needs to model our priorities as an institution and as a college and as a department. If you can't figure out what the priorities are by looking at the budget, then you're not doing it right. So that's just a frame I bring to it. I think it works pretty well in our environment, but it does help to know. So being really fluent in how the budget flows and how that connects to strategic priorities helps to make things very real, you know.
I wanted to echo some of the previous comments and just thanking the committee for your openness and for how much you've shared. This is sort of a follow-up on the previous question. I told a colleague of mine at another institution I'd be coming here this morning, and he quipped, "Oh, you're planning to join the evil empire." And this colleague's perspective was, things look a certain way when you're a student or a faculty, and then when you're in these positions, things look differently, and it changes you. In a bad way, was his point of view. I'm curious, because I understand the very realities you were just speaking to, that sometimes policy, well, for instance, you gave the example of, this change in policy will basically solve our insurance problem. It's only 400 students whose insurance will be cut. That message sounds very different if I'm one of those 400 students than if I'm plugging the hole in the budget. I'm curious if you find yourselves in positions where you're being asked to represent mandates or priorities from above and not being permitted to represent ideas that come from below. Surely in different levels of administration, one is sometimes in between those two perspectives, doing the translation in both directions. It occurs to me as a professor, we might enjoy the benefits of tenure. In other roles, we might be less comfortable saying what we really think, or pointing out drawbacks to things that are being impressed upon us. And I'm curious how you've navigated those situations, if you've found yourself in those.
I've told my provost multiple times, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to me? I get to go write my other book. And so that's how I draw the line. I think some people get into these administrative positions and get so desperate not to lose them that they lose their moorings a little bit. And my administrative positions haven't been worth that. So that's just my initial response to that. But I think you've probably had more, I don't know.
Yeah. Tricky, right? Because you're always squeezed, right? There's just no question. There isn't a day that goes by that you're not squeezed by something you know is being pressed upon you, and something that's being pressed upon you this direction. And that's where transparency and real honesty about, here's some non-negotiables, it looks like. Here's what I've done to try to negotiate, but I at this point, I decided it would be better for me to not be fired and to advocate, but that means we have to do these things. So I'm pretty honest about where I'm willing to push and how far I'm willing to push, and when I can say, I don't think this one's going to get us anywhere, except that you'll end up doing this without my help. But the reason I feel like I can stake that ground is there's a lot of little bits and pieces of success, right? So that's why you diversify your portfolio, in any way, right? So if you make sure that you are firing on, 10 rods at the same time, I'm thinking rods in the fire, too many metaphors going on simultaneously, right? But if you always have 5 articles in the pipeline, if one of them gets rejected, it's not so bad. If 2 of them get rejected, you're still okay, right? Because you've got 3 in the pipeline and you're moving things forward. And that's actually great preparation for being an administrator, right? You've got to have enough things that you can say, well, okay, these things are going well, so therefore you should trust me. And even if these things are a little bit tougher, we can have that conversation. And to have that, I mean, that's one of the reasons I fundraise like my life depends on it, is because a lot of people's lives depend on it, right? So not only does it help students very, very clearly and help our faculty very clearly, but it helps me to be trusted when I need to say, hey, you know what, this one is not going to work. When I have to say to my boss, this is going to be a little bit too hard for us to get to right away. Can you give us another year? Or how about if we do it this way instead? So it's that balance of doing the right thing and being really thoughtful about making sure that you show your wins so that you can be trusted when you have to take a loss.
I think I would echo what both Sarah and Matthew said, in the sense of openness and transparency in both directions. Mm-hmm. That there are certain things that that you can't do, in both directions. I think it. I've been fortunate in that when I've been in these situations, it's been largely around resources and not around principles. Mm-hmm. Because the ones around principles obviously are harder to deal with, because those tend to be things that aren't open to compromise or different possibilities, in the way that resource situations often can be accommodated with either thinking about it differently or doing it more gradually, or coming up with an alternate solution, or at least being able to explain clearly. So I feel that I've been fortunate and haven't had a really serious issue like that from my own experience, where I felt caught in the middle between, a higher level of administration and faculty. And I think, again, just going back to something I said maybe an hour ago about maintaining the connection to teaching and research, for me, that's very helpful in terms of having these conversations and not having that perception that I'm one of the other, that I'm one of the the evil empire or dark side. That I mean, I don't feel that. And of course I've heard the same language used, and I may have even used it myself on occasion. But I think for me, that's another part of the reason why I am still so committed to maintaining a presence in the classroom and research. That sometimes it's hard to tell if you're changing yourself. It can happen so incrementally over time, and so I do think for me it's important that I'm engaged in all those activities.
Thank you all for your comments and really your openness. It's been really great. I wasn't able to come to the beginning of the session, so perhaps you addressed this earlier, but I was wondering if you have any advice just in general for faculty, for the people who you supervise, as far as things that we can do to help you all be more effective with your positions.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm sorry. We're having a pretty significant budget challenge, like a lot of institutions are. And I've been going to each school and making sure that I explain exactly what's happening, where each of those raspberry, blueberry dollars is going and why. And trying to make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk about what they think we should be doing about it. I'm keeping attendance, so if a faculty member has to do something else, I have a follow-up meeting with them. It's been an extraordinary amount of work, but it's the right thing to do for sure. But one of the things that keeps coming out of it as my faculty members, they're such great colleagues, and they keep saying, what can we do to help you? And I say really two things. One is, if we keep growing, or if we keep showing that we have national prominence, or we keep doing excellent things, and you keep me informed constantly of those things, that means that we have a louder voice at the table when we need a loud voice. The other thing is, frankly, if you're annoyed at me, pick up your phone and call me, text me right away, because I need all of us to be, even if we don't agree on how we're going to do everything, I need your support. And if I don't have it, then tell me how I can earn it. It's really, really important, because complaining around me is very undermining for everything that we're doing. And frankly, I hope I'm vulnerable enough that people mostly feel that they can do that. I think a lot of us fool ourselves into thinking we are, but people do say, hey, I don't really like this thing that we're doing, and we'll have a conversation, and sometimes we change and sometimes we don't. But that, to me, is the currency I can work with. If 85, 90% of the faculty say they believe in what I'm doing, that speaks volumes when I need to go advocate.
I would echo these and add one thing, which is consult. A message that I always give I think it's partly our training and our disciplines. As we go through grad school and work towards a PhD, we are trained to be extremely independent. We spend all day, every day almost, when we're working on that dissertation by ourselves. And I think the culture in graduate school is changing a bit nowadays, but a couple of decades ago, I think we really felt that was what we should be doing every day, was being by ourselves, figuring things out by ourselves, coming with a completed chapter after 2 or 3 months of hard labor to our advisor and saying, here's my completed chapter, now read it, right? And that breaking out of that mindset is something that doesn't always occur when one becomes a faculty member. And as an administrator, the most difficult situations often arise because there was a lack of consultation on some aspect of policy at an earlier stage. And that's a message that I always give to new faculty, is just ask questions. Come talk to someone in administration if you're unsure of how to deal with a student matter, or if there's the issue with a staff member, or if there's a teaching assistant that you're having a problem with, there's a conflict developing, come and talk about it. So making sure lines of communication are open. I think all of us prefer hearing from faculty members than not hearing, whether it's via email or it's in person. Just keeping those lines of communication open is something which, for me, that's the most helpful thing for faculty.
Yeah.
This has been a wonderful, and I hope you've noticed, wide-ranging discussion. Nominally, this conversation was meant to, I shouldn't say meant, but was intended to, I guess, to focus on making the move to administration. That if you look back at the abstract, you'll see we've wandered from that. But I think it's been a healthy discussion. We've got a great perspective about the relationship of music to the rest of the academy, and the relationship of the academy to the country and the world at large. That maybe doesn't get articulated all the time in meetings like this. But when we get some people with broader and, dare I say, higher up perspectives, I think we can all learn a lot. So with that in mind, will you help me thank all three of our panelists and Kathryn Nolan, who couldn't be here today.
Thank you. Thank you. I know.
Any one of these panelists, but I'm sure that they would be willing and eager to meet with you individually if you have questions about their jobs or want to follow up on anything. Otherwise, go have lunch. Thanks, everyone.